By Chairwoman Eddie Denise Johnson.
He did. And Gupta is here, also joining us, MSNBC political analyst, our friend, former Senator Claire McCaskill's back, and Olivia Choi's here, former advisor to Vice President Mike Pence on the coronavirus task force. She left the administration last August and is now the director of the Republican Accountability Project. Claire, I'm happy to see you, my friend. Last time we met, there was an impeachment trial going on. We've turned to the crisis, I think, impacting every single person in this country in one way or another, where they live, in their homes. And I just want to hear your thoughts on this sad day of 500,000 souls lost, with a lot of reason for hope on the horizon.
I know it makes you uncomfortable when anybody says nice things about you on air, but I do have to say that I think the effort you have made to make sure that the people that we have lost from COVID are known, who they are, what their lives were about. Because what I'm most worried about, Nicole, is we've gotten to the point that these are all just numbers. This is a staggering disaster that has occurred in our country. And yes, there are reasons, and I'm anxious to hear Dr. Gupta. I'm especially curious about why the variant is not picking up steam in the United States right now. There are reasons to be optimistic, and it does appear that Joe Biden has his priorities straight. And how refreshing it was today for me to turn on our network and hear the scientists unbridled. Just them talking and explaining everything from, treatments to why and how we open schools. And it's just the scientists. It's not politicians. And that, of course, is a major step forward.
You, of course, made me cry a little bit. And these stories stay with all of us. I mean, a 9-year-old boy in Texas, more moms younger than me than I can count. A generation of grandparents. And Dr. Gupta, I wonder if you can speak to Claire's specific question there. Why are we so far not seeing those variants? Did they come here sort of at a point in time that might intersect with our vaccination schedule? Or can you explain what's going on here right now behind the numbers?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Nicole. And Senator McCaskill, to your question, we're still figuring it out. There's a lot of uncertainty here. Let me remind everybody that right now, we still have a sequencing capability to detect these variants that's ramping up. The Biden administration is putting in a lot of money to ramp this up. So, frankly, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know truly what the true prevalence rate is of these variants. There might be more than we think at the moment. But let me say, just on this day of remembrance, as we're thinking about how can we mitigate further loss of life here, every model, Nicole, is suggesting that we could still potentially lose 120,000 additional to 150,000 additional Americans by June 1st. It does not have to be that way. That is not preordained loss. So all of your viewers out there, I know there's a lot of talk about the vaccines, and I'm hearing specifically, and as are others, should I get one vaccine, say Pfizer, because it stops transmission, we think, in addition to be very effective against severe disease, preventing severe disease, versus, say, another vaccine. We're hearing reports out of the United Kingdom that people want Pfizer, they don't want AstraZeneca. To all of you out there, all these vaccines here are going to keep you out of the ICU, keep you from seeing me, and they will save your life and the life of your loved ones. Nicole, we need vaccine confidence across the range of vaccines that are approved, not just for one or two brands here. All of them work, and the quicker we adopt that message worldwide, because the entire world needs to get vaccinated for us to end this pandemic, the quicker we'll be out of this and back to normal life.
Well, Dr. Gupta, why aren't there more vaccines here? Why isn't the Johnson & Johnson vaccine getting approved more quickly and distributed around this country?
Well, end of week is when FDA is going to be reviewing that briefing document. They are taking their time. The FDA, I know, has gone through a lot in the last year. At times, we were worried about it being politicized, but they have rigorous career scientists, and they are looking at the data in ways no other country is looking at. So we're going to, I suspect, see an emergency authorization for the FDA, for the Johnson & Johnson one shot by end of weekend potentially, which is going to be great news for all of us.
Olivia, we get the benefit of all your experiences in government on the show, but none, I imagine, is more searing than knowing that we didn't have to be here. Joe Biden didn't have to end his day today paying tribute to 500,000 Americans who died from COVID. It's a pandemic, but our response is abysmal, the worst in the world. You were on that task force. What are you feeling today when you see a new president, as Claire said, unleashing, Sarah Palin might use the word unshackling the scientists, letting that drive policy, and stay out of the way and do the presidential parts of this. The flags will be lowered. We will have that opportunity. The second one, he held a memorial service, a national memorial service, the day before he was inaugurated, and this is the second.
Yeah, I think it's twofold, Nicole. It's, I grieve. Still, it's not something that I carry lightly with me, I have to say, having lived a lot of the response firsthand and knowing what happened and how different it could have been, and the fact that it didn't have to be this way, and the fact that we, the medical experts on the task force and everybody I worked with were concerned that the numbers would be this high if it didn't go the way that they recommended and all of that. And so it's hard. And I'm glad that President Biden is actually taking the time to remember the loss and the suffering that many Americans have felt, and the families out there who have felt this firsthand, as well as the medical community who has been at the front lines, right, responding to this every single day, doing everything they can. But then I feel hopeful as well, because I'm grateful. And I'll tell you what, I'll never take for granted what the power of elections and change can do when you get the right person in office with the right tone during a crisis, because that really matters. And we've lived this firsthand. And I'm grateful that we have someone that's willing to trust the science, who's willing to give these doctors a platform to speak and to be transparent, because transparency is key, especially in a situation like this.
I wasn't sure if I was going to get a chance to play this, but you just set it up perfectly. I have, because I was on the air when it happened, Dr. Fauci's very first public briefing after President Biden was sworn in. Let me play it, because I think it illustrates this point that you and Claire are making beautifully.
Today, can you talk a little bit about how you feel kind of released from what you had been doing for the last year?
Yeah, but you said I was joking about it. I was very serious about it. I wasn't joking. No, actually, I mean, obviously, I don't want to be going back, over history, but it was very clear that there were things that were said, be it regarding things like hydroxychloroquine and other things like that, that really was uncomfortable because they were not based on scientific fact. I can tell you, I take no pleasure at all in being in a situation of contradicting the president. So it was really something that you didn't feel that you could actually say something and there wouldn't be any repercussions about it. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
Claire, it cannot be
additional unemployment checks to people, the $1,400 payment. Now, a lot of this is politics. It's not getting rammed through. It's being addressed by both houses of Congress. There'll be a vote. It may get passed by the House. It may not. It's a slim majority of Democrats now, only 10 seats. And the Senate may not agree to the $15 minimum wage that the Biden administration has proposed. It's normal politics, give and take. We want this, you want that. Let's see where we can compromise. And we'll see whether or not this program goes through. It's not a foregone conclusion.
No, well, the minimum wage part is certainly up in the air. South Carolina Republican Tim Scott, in fact, telling Neil and Cavuto Live that it would kill up to 4,000 jobs, and he would prefer a smaller increase. Take a listen.
Slowing the growth of the minimum wage over a longer period of time and not going to $15 an hour, going to $10 or $11 an hour is at least a place to start the discussion. I'm open to the discussion. I am a free market guy. I believe that the free enterprise system actually increases wages faster.
Kelsey, this is another one. We saw the CBO report, so maybe there's something for everyone there, but we do know it's over 1 million jobs lost. We heard from the NFIB, which is probably the most important institution when it comes to small businesses. They're saying it would be an unmitigated disaster, particularly for restaurants and leisure, which only lost 600,000 jobs in the last 2 months. In the meantime, and I brought it up earlier with the Republican congressman, right now, first quarter GDP could be as high as 10%. there are pockets of this economy that are coming on like gangbusters. What hurt us more than anything else was the shutdown. We're going to reward those states that shut down their citizens, that had the most job layoffs. Fine, we got to help fellow Americans, but $15 on top of that seems like a bridge too far. Your thoughts?
You're right. This bill does not put children first by funding schools that refuse to teach children in person, and this bill does not put small businesses first by mandating a minimum wage hike on them, while so many of them are closing their doors, some permanently. We wouldn't have the wild success of the Barstool Sports Fund if small businesses were doing okay now. It is unethical to tell them that they have to pay their employees more right now, where they can't even pay their bills to have employees in the first place. We need to remember the real minimum wage in this country is $0. We do not want a single more American losing their job as a result of this pandemic. The CBO said our economy without COVID relief can bounce back. It likely will bounce back without any stimulus by as early as this summer. Of course, we all want targeted and temporary relief, but we cannot do this massive spending.
Listen, I think we all want to help those who need help, but there's a lot in here. By the way, it wasn't 4,000 jobs, 4 million jobs. Thank you all very much. Meanwhile, looking live at Denver's International Airport, the federal
one job a day, but 2 jobs a day, just to get by. And so I hope we can prevail on those who have some misgivings to find a way to improve the minimum wage. We haven't touched it for years. It's long overdue.
Thank you
Okay,
so much,
thank
sir.
you.
We appreciate it.
Buy Samsung Galaxy S21 Plus.
On tonight, which is, how do you...
A thing or two be
Sufferers. Dark
Start the show kind of fresh, so I always try to give it my all and blow out my voice, and it's not even stuff that goes on television. Or
the Judiciary Committee wrapping up his comments after the hearing with Merrick Garland, nominated to be Attorney General. The hearing wrapping up today after about 6.5 hours of testimony, including some breaks, and the senator mentioning their day number 2 tomorrow with witnesses. And we'll cover that. We'll have that at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. It will be over on cspan.org. We also want to let you know that in case you missed today's testimony, today's hearing with the nominee, Merrick Garland, will re-air it in its entirety beginning at 8 p.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN. You're watching C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. C-SPAN was created by America's cable television companies in 1979. Today, we're brought to you by these television companies who provide C-SPAN to public service.
From sleeping, you're to...
Way to go about making better, more sound COVID policies.
It's certainly fair to say that that's probably a good way to start and a good part to focus on. Minorities have really suffered during this pandemic, the number of comorbidities that exist in these communities, and also just the information flow certainly was not there. And, the previous administration, their problem, their way of fixing it was just put someone of that color minority group at the table and put them in front of the governors and solve it that way, instead of actually doing things that were going to make a difference and help, while the doctors were sitting there discussing it during meetings, saying this is a major problem. So I do think we're off to a good start. But look, the disinformation and sort of the divisiveness, it's there, and it's a problem, and it will continue, right? They're doing that CPAC conference down in Florida because they can gather in mass gathering, and you're going to see a bunch of people gathering there, probably maskless. And these people are going to travel there, and they're going to carry this, they're going to probably contract the virus, and they're going to carry it back to their communities. And just when we start to see hope, we'll have the legacy of these types of, information and divisiveness on the mask and things like that are going to continue. And it's going to continue to be an ongoing challenge.
It's so sad. Never mind any of the innocent people that they sit next to on airplanes, or the people who work in the hotel or serve them their meals. it is one of the slow-moving, enduring scandals of Trump's legacy. Claire, I want to hit you with one more story in the category of hope. The New York Times is reporting on the prospects of a post-pandemic economic boom, and obviously this is a big part of the current White House's messaging and trying to garner support in Congress for their COVID relief package. They seem to have a lot of support among the public. The Times writes, economists fear that the rebound will primarily benefit those at the top, compounding inequities that the pandemic has widened. But for many businesses and households that have struggled to stay afloat during the pandemic, those concerns pale in comparison with the opportunities that a boom could provide. I've heard others liken it to sort of a roaring 20s kind of consumption celebration period in this country. What do you predict?
I think that's going to happen. Everyone's anxious to travel, whether it's down the road to see family or whether it's in an airplane on a vacation. Everyone's anxious to go out and do things that seem old-fashioned now, like shopping. Yeah. And we do have a consumer economy. Yeah. And so our economy succeeds when people, one, feel confident about what's going on around them, and two, spend money. And I think we're on our way to both of those, but it also underscores how important increasing the minimum wage is. I know they're going to argue back and forth. I don't know how quickly they'll end up passing it and how quickly it will get to $15, but it's no question that that is also a big part of what will be a boon, because that will lift all boats, so to speak. If we can raise the wages of those who are sometimes have to turn to government help, even if they work 40 hours a week, that's a big deal in this country. And I think that Joe Biden has a really strong case right now. It will be very politically difficult for these Republicans to stand in the way of this relief package.
Hence their reliance on disinformation. Dr. Gupta, I want to ask you about one more headline that I listened to the interview, and I'm pretty sure Dr. Fauci didn't plan to make this one. There's some reporting that there may be some occasions or some periods where Americans may have to wear our masks through this year and maybe even into 2022. Can you give that some context?
Of course, Nicole. You know, Dr. Fauci was speaking to the uncertainty of the next several months. Of course, the best case scenario here is that life starts to normalize in the middle of the summer. That's contingent on the variants, for example, not taking root. We hope they don't, encouraging signs they don't. That there's no hiccups in vaccination. That vaccine confidence continues to grow, we hope. If those things don't happen, there is certainly there's a possible scenario where we're still battling this pandemic into the winter, into Q4, into the winter. So he is referencing that. He's building in that anticipatory guidance that if these things don't follow through the way we were expecting them to, there's a potential for masking into early 2022. But let's hope, and he also is messaging on this, that the most likely scenario here is a large degree of normalcy by the fall. And I think that's what we really need to keep top of mind.
Dr. Gupta, Olivia Choi, thank you both so much for starting us off today. Claire's sticking around. When we come back.
So I feel as though we'll see something sooner than later. I mean, there's no absolute sense of timing other than a statute of limitations that could run, meaning some charges wouldn't be able to be brought if it went on for too long because of the law only giving prosecutors a certain amount of time. But my sense is that a lot of the investigation will already be done and that this may be one, if not the final piece in that investigation.
Put on your former federal prosecutor hat. What would you be looking for if you got a hold of these documents?
Well, you know, I'm a former assistant DA from Manhattan, so I might put on both of those hats right now. Right, so I think there's a number of things that they're going to be looking for. And the first is what Trump's involvement was, what actually happened, the hush money payments, what the links are back and forth between them, and what his taxes and his business taxes show. Remember that when the New York Times did the reporting on his taxes, there were a lot of potential ways in which it could have been bank fraud, it could have been insurance fraud, he was getting deals. And so I would be looking for anything connecting Trump to those transactions. And really, again, my sense is that the taxes are part of a larger investigation, and it is very likely that they've already interviewed witnesses from the Trump organization, witnesses who would have had knowledge of how Michael Cohen, how these deals would have been cut. And so the last piece is these documents showing what money was actually paid, what valuation was given in order to get loans, what actual taxes were paid. And when you line them up, you can see whether there's a discrepancy. So those are the kinds of things I would be looking for.
And very quickly, we only have about 20 seconds left. Will the public ever get to see these documents?
It depends. Immediately, no, but if Trump is charged in an indictment, it's very possible that part of the tax returns or the financial documents could be included as part of that indictment if it's a speaking indictment. And if he goes to trial, it's very likely that parts of this would be evidence in a trial if he's charged with bank and financial fraud. Again, we don't know. And right now the answer is no, but I think it's possible if the former president is charged that we would see something relating to these documents.
We're a long way away from that, though. Everybody should know. Ann Milgram, thanks so much. Appreciate it. A once unimaginable number. Dr. Anthony Fauci discussing America's handling of the pandemic as the country's on the verge of surpassing 500,000 lives lost to COVID. Stay with us.
Your roles cast aside the rule of law. Trump appointees in the department sidelined career public servants, from line attorneys to
which things have come off aircraft fallen to the ground. So we need coordination in terms of being sure that the inspection process includes the blades and the cowling, and that it is, robust. This engine, the Pratt & Whitney engine, was first certified around 2005, to the early 2000s. And yet, the NTSB found there wasn't a process in place at the time of the previous accident.
Well, Jim, we appreciate you coming on and helping to walk us through this. And hopefully, next time we bring you on, it will be maybe to celebrate something, but certainly not these anymore.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I hope so. Well, the American people deserve something. So.
Without a doubt. There's no doubt about it. Meanwhile, folks, Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York doubling down over the alleged cover-up. Could the nursing home scandal, though, rise to the level of a criminal offense? That's next.
Your all-access pass to stream all things CPAC is with Fox Nation.
The country took us in and protected us. And I feel an obligation to the country to pay back. And this is the highest, best use of my own set of skills to pay back. And so I want very much to be the kind of Attorney General that you're saying I could become.
Guys, that's your next Attorney General. Isn't that good news? An emotional Merrick Garland recalling his family's history fleeing anti-Semitism as he explains his motivation for wanting to become the country's Attorney General. Nearly 5 years after his nomination for a seat on the Supreme Court was torpedoed by Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans, Merrick Garland finally got his confirmation hearing, this time as President Biden's nominee for AG. At an event announcing his nomination, Biden told Garland, quote, "Your loyalty is not to me. It's to the law, the Constitution, the people of this nation. Restoring the integrity and the independence of the Justice Department is just one of the many challenges facing Garland should he be confirmed. He'll also take the reins of a sprawling investigation into the attack on the Capitol and lead the DOJ's efforts to combat domestic extremism." Joining our conversation, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman, who worked at the Department of Justice as chief of the fraud division and as the lead prosecutor in Robert Mueller's special counsel's office. Claire is still here. I mean, to see that emotion and that love of country, and that the next Attorney General is someone who feels like he owes the country something, is such a pivot is not a strong enough word from what we just went through, where they were there wringing out every last public servant for their trespasses against, I don't know what, Trumpism, I guess. What an appearance today, Andrew Weissman.
Well, Nicole, I had the exact same impression. You compare this to the former Attorney General, William Barr, the contrast in terms of humility, in terms of a sense of giving to the country, of really approaching this as the people's lawyer, not the president's lawyer. And I don't think there's anyone who can think that that's not going to happen under Attorney General Garland. So in terms of those all-important signals and that personal message, it was really quite moving. But it was just as strong a contrast going from Trump to Biden as for us who lived in the Department of Justice as it will be going from Barr to Merrick Garland.
I want to ask about.
We hit shots from anywhere, unlike those others.
My sub half state.
Wait, would he?
100,000 lives would be lost in this pandemic. In a few hours, President Biden is planning on leading a candle lighting ceremony to mark this horrific record, and this all comes as the U.S. continues to grapple with how exactly we can live with this pandemic until mass vaccination has happened, as CNN's Nick Watt now reports.
If I could tell her anything, I said, babe, I love you so much.
Zarina Rose, a 42-year-old nurse, died after giving birth. One of the nearly 500,000 now dead in America. It did not have to be this way.
If you look back historically, we've done worse than most any other country. The kind of disparate responses of different states rather than having a unified approach.
A disengaged, now former president.
I said it's going away, and it is going away.
And the politicization of masks.
I think you could make a case that tens of thousands of people died as a result.
With new, more contagious variants of the virus circulating, say 3 influential medical associations in a statement to mark 500,000 dead, now is not the time to let your guard down.
Now let's just go forward and be completely committed as a unified country to just go at this together. This is a common enemy.
Our weapons, masks, and needles. More than 75 million vaccine doses now distributed. Weather-related delays, Dr. Fauci says, will be made up by midweek.
You're getting the Pfizer vaccine.
Still, less than 6% of the U.S. population has been fully vaccinated, and the country likely won't reach herd immunity until next winter, say University of Washington modelers. A new CDC study of COVID clusters at reopened elementary schools in Atlanta found teachers played a significant role in any in-school transmission. Every cluster involved less than ideal physical distancing and in most, inadequate mask use by students. Across society, some things might never be the same.
I think the handshake, for example, is probably going away. I hope so. I do think masks in the cough, cold, flu season in the winter months would make a lot of sense.
So, nearly 500,000 dead. That's the entire population of Kansas City and more. Now, how many more people are going to die? Well, the CDC projects that another 30,000 could die, Jake, in just the next 3 weeks. Jake?
All right, Nick, thanks so much. I want to bring in CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, let's start with the U.S. death toll. You and I have been talking about this pandemic since February. We're about to hit 500,000 lives lost in the U.S. in this pandemic. We were at 400,000 just 37 days ago. The number of deaths reported every day, it seems like it's going down, but we're still losing people at an alarming pace.
Right, losing people at an alarming pace that would have been unimaginable, certainly at this time last year or even several months ago. I mean, Jake, it's one of these things, and I think it's going to be one of these longer discussions that you and I have, but this idea that, I mean, there was such concern, and there's obviously still concern, but such concern at the beginning when a few people's lives were lost, and somewhat ironically, as more and more people have died, there's almost been this sort of empathy fade, this compassion fatigue that happens sometimes. We become too inured to this, and I'm glad we still put the numbers up on the screen and people are reminded. I'm glad Nick Watt still does that piece and reminds us that there are stories behind all these numbers, because this should never feel normal. I mean, what else can we say, Jake? I remember a year ago we were talking, could not believe that we would possibly get to 60,000 by August or whatever the number was by that point. I cannot look at that side of the screen in any way think that that's, it's okay or normal in any way.
Yeah, and a year ago tomorrow, the then president was saying that they had it all under control. A new CDC study out today raises questions about in-person learning. The study looked at elementary schools in Atlanta, Georgia. Researchers found 9 clusters of coronavirus. 8 of the 9 clusters involved a teacher, and 8 clusters involved probable educator-to-student spread. Significantly, the CDC says in these 9 clusters, physical distancing was less than ideal, and student mask use was inadequate. What do you take from this study?
I think that's those last 2 caveats I think are perhaps the crucial points here. I mean, we have seen so many studies like this, and I'm sure people are getting whiplash hearing about all these studies saying, okay, well, this study seems to suggest you can't open in-person school safely. This one suggests you can do it. But when you start to really drill down on the data, Jake, I think it comes down to this idea that it can be done if. And the ifs are the same things, frankly, that we've been talking about for a long time. We now have evidence to show that those basic sort of ideas of what can decrease risk are true. We now have the data behind that. But if you have the square footage, you can keep the physical distancing. If you have a diligent mask wearing, it makes a huge difference. And if you can actually improve ventilation and objectively show that, show carbon dioxide levels or whatever it requires to basically show that there's not a lot of exhaled air in an environment, you can dramatically reduce transmission. It can be a safer environment than the surrounding community. I know it's a provocative point, and people don't like to, everybody wants the data around this, but the data has shown it can be done, and when you don't do it, it can lead to problems.
Yeah, take a listen to CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky. This is a couple of weeks ago. I had her on State of the Union. She was talking about the challenges of making kids wear masks.
Mask breaching is among the reasons that we have transmission within schools when it happens. We have other data that was just published in CDC's MMWR that demonstrate that somewhere around 60% of students are reliably masking. That has to be universal.
So this is interesting because she was saying to me 60%. Is this a problem we're not paying enough attention to? Theory versus reality when it comes to kids wearing masks and social distancing. The idea that we can say here on TV, yes, it needs to be 98, 99% masking and social distancing, and we're still talking about kids, and they're not going to do it.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. You and I are both dads, in addition to being reporters, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think this is we can talk about the objective data all we want and how well masks work. If it doesn't translate into something that is substantive for kids and their behavior, it doesn't matter. That is the reality. I do think, when we talk about that Wisconsin study, again, which the CDC also had up on their website, and we can show you the data, it was really low transmission rates, but if you go back and look at this critical issue of masks, it was around 93% mask adherence. Jake, I think, there's a problem here. First of all, some of these school districts may not just have enough masks, and that is a legitimate problem. I didn't think it was initially, but it's true. I've talked to lots of educators around the country. They don't have basic resources in some of these places, and that's a problem. But in other places, there's still this sort of hangover effect, I think, from last spring where, do I wear a mask, do I not wear a mask? How much is this really, sound advice or not? And I think we're still feeling the repercussions of that in some of these school districts. Having said that, Jake, it doesn't take away from the fact that the evidence does show if you do wear the masks, it can have a significant difference. Without vaccinations, without all the other sort of big sledgehammer sort of tools that we're talking about. It's not to take away from vaccinations, but school districts that did this safely did not yet have vaccinations.
Yeah, and I don't want to pick on kids because I think kids are probably much, much better at wearing these masks than adults have proven to be. It's just a question of reality versus theory when it comes to telling anybody to wear masks. Sanjay Gupta, thanks so much. Always great to have you on. Tonight, CNN is going to honor
eggs taste fresher and more
the 500,000 Americans who have lost their lives to this pandemic. We remember 500,000. A national memorial service for COVID-19 airs tonight on CNN at 11 p.m. Eastern. Please join us. Facing a failed confirmation, a potential one at least, one of President Biden's key nominees loses the support of a Democratic senator. Can the White House get the Republican support they need now? Stay with us.
This vote
and help prevent severe asthma attacks. It's not a steroid, but can help.
DOJ is going to avoid looking at all the facts, and if they implicate Donald Trump or if there are other crimes that Donald Trump or his family committed, I would depend on Merrick Garland to call balls and strikes and bring the evidence forward. And that would not be politicizing DOJ. That would be following the instructions of Mitch McConnell.
You're right, and that was Mitch McConnell's explicit request that the justice system do what he and 42 other U.S. senators could not. Claire McCaskill, it's wonderful to see you today, my friend. Thanks for spending some time with us. Andrew's sticking around.
You bet.
When we come back, the work continues. Federal prosecutors granted access to Donald Trump's taxes, increasing the former president's legal vulnerability. We'll look at what comes next for him.
Never really eating enough fruits and vegetables. That was the one thing that I always felt that I...
Examples. Unfortunately, a lot of what we've seen so far from the Justice Department is discouraging. They have whiplash, inducing changes to litigation positions. They're going through rescinding excellent. So in 2010, part of Secretary Vilsack's budget request included over $1 billion to ensure a robust settlement for all black farmers who were discriminated against about the Durham investigation. Starting January 2017, I began an investigation on how the Justice Department and the FBI handled Crossfire Hurricane, its investigation into the Trump campaign. And a top priority during Secretary Vilsack's previous tenure was ensuring a comprehensive plan to improve the USDA's record on civil rights. Can't ever happen again. If confirmed, you'll have oversight of Special Counsel Durham's review of Crossfire Hurricane. When Bill Barr appeared before the committee for his nomination hearing, he said, quote, "It's vitally important that the special counsel be allowed to complete his investigation," end of quote. My support for justice to those who have faced discrimination remains constant, and I am looking forward to working with Secretary Vilsack and leaders in the Congress to ensure equal rights for every farmer and family in this country. Protect Mueller. So, Judge Garland, I just want to say that I like you, I respect you, and I think you're a good pick for this job. But I have a lot of questions about how you're going to run the Department of Justice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I am honored to appear before you today as the President's nominee to be the Attorney
Judiciary Committee about 5 years after President Obama nominated him to the Supreme Court. Republicans blocked him from getting a hearing at that point, but today, as you mentioned, he wants to become the nation's top law enforcement officer, and he is gaining praise from both sides of the aisle. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee today are asking Garland to commit to keeping the federal investigation alive into the president's son, Hunter Biden. The younger Biden is under the microscope for his taxes and business dealings overseas. Charles, the White House announced more than 40 U.S. attorneys from the Trump administration are leaving their posts by the end of the month, typical when a new president takes office. However, President Biden is keeping David Weiss, the U.S. attorney in Delaware, overseeing the younger Biden investigation. Now, just about 35 minutes ago, Texas Senator Ted Cruz pressed Judge Garland over concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving reported federal investigation into the nursing home scandal involving New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Listen here.
I don't know any of the facts, but I can guarantee you that somebody with a conflict of interest will not be the person running an investigation of any kind.
That's all Garland really would say on that matter, but he does call the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol a, quote, heinous attack promises to prosecute those involved. Now, before becoming a judge in 1997, he was on the prosecution team of Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. He also has experience and says that he has experience with attacks on our nation from within, prosecuting those attacks. Charles, he says his first order of business, if confirmed by the Senate, is to have a full briefing on what happened January 6th. He is expected to coast to confirmation. Charles.
David, thank you very much. In the meantime, the confirmation of a different cabinet.
The norms that will ensure that the department adheres to the rule of law. These are policies that protect the independence of the department from partisan influence in law enforcement, that strictly regulate communications with the White House, that establish guidelines for FBI domestic operations and foreign intelligence collection,
she won't live long enough to see them all reach adulthood. Dr. Susan Moore was a mother, physician, and advocate. When Dr. Moore was diagnosed with COVID-19, she documented her battle on her Facebook page.
That was hard.
And she detailed her fight to receive equitable health care as a black woman, according to the New York Times. The Indiana doctor loved practicing medicine, helping others, and was a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, according to a GoFundMe created in her honor.
Let us shine the lights in the darkness along the sacred pool of reflection. Remember all we lost.
When racial tensions in the 1970s erupted onto New York streets, Corky Lee captured it all. A crusader of photographic justice. His work memorialized the contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, a legacy he thought was often ignored in American history. He began his career photographing protests that followed the beating of a Chinese American man by New York City officers. Over the next 5 decades, Lee's lens exposed the hard truths of racism, labor, and housing while capturing the beauty of the Asian American community. His latest work documented racially motivated attacks toward Asians during this pandemic. At the time of his death, Lee was producing a film about his life's work. Award-winning NBA reporter and analyst SIOUX Smith had a career spanning more than 2 decades. He reported for NBA TV and NBA.com and spent 11 years reporting for Turner Sports. Public tributes honoring Smith's life came from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver and retired NBA great Dwayne Wade. He leaves behind his wife, Heather, and their 3 children. Marshall McKay was one of the most prominent Native American leaders in the country. The LA Times reports that McKay pushed for economic independence for his people and helped set up a successful tribal casino and resort near Sacramento. McKay sat on the boards of the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington and the Autry Museum in Los Angeles, where he became the first indigenous person to chair the museum's board of trustees. In December, McKay and his wife both tested positive for the coronavirus. She recovered. He did not. Marshall McKay was 68 years old. Jonathan KELO was just 32 when he contracted the coronavirus. He spent 28 days in the hospital, 20 of them on a ventilator. But he seemed to improve. Then his wife Katie got a call from a hospital nurse telling her to come quickly. By the time she arrived, he was gone. When she got home, she turned on his phone and found he had left his life insurance information on it, along with a heartbreaking final love letter. It read, in part, "You are truly one of a kind. Make sure you live your life with happiness and that same passion that made me fall in love with you. Seeing you be the best mom to the kids is the greatest thing I've ever experienced."
Tell me you love me so I have it on video.
I love you.
Okay.
And tonight, CNN will honor, through personal tributes, through prayer, and through song, the 500,000 Americans, 500,000 who have lost their lives to this cruel pandemic. We remember 500,000. A national memorial service for COVID-19 is tonight on CNN at 11 p.m. Eastern. Please join us, and we'll be right back.
Family Fit.
So many of the rituals that help us cope, that help us honor those we loved, hadn't been available to us. the final rites with family gathered around, the proper homegoing, showered with stories and love, tribal leaders passing out the final traditions of sacred cultures on sacred lands. As a nation, we cannot and we must not let this go on. That's why the day before my inauguration, at the COVID-19 memorial, at the reflecting pool at the National Mall, I said, to heal, we must remember. I know it's hard, I promise you, I know it's hard, I remember. But that's how you heal, you have to remember. And it's also important to do that as a nation. For those who have lost loved ones, this is what I know. They're never truly gone. They'll always be part of your heart. The day will come when the memory of the loved one you lost will bring a smile to your lips before a tear to your eye. It will come, I promise you. My prayer for you, though, is that day will come sooner rather than later. And that's when you know you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And for me, the way through sorrow and grief is to find purpose. I don't know how many of you lost someone a while ago. I wonder, is he or she proud of me now? Is it what they want me to do? I know, it's how I feel. We can find purpose. Purpose worthy of the lives they live, and worthy of the country we love. So today, I ask all Americans to remember. Remember those we lost, and those we left behind. But as we remember, as we all remember, I also ask us to act, to remain vigilant, to stay socially distant, to mask up.
Camry all-wheel drive for $229 a month for...
It's not Democrats and Republicans who are dying from the virus. It's our fellow Americans. It's our neighbors, our friends, our mothers, our fathers, our sons, our daughters, husbands, wives. We have to fight this together as one people, as the United States of America. That's the only way we're going to beat this virus, I promise you. The only way to spare more pain and more loss, the only way. These millstones no longer mark our national mourning. These milestones, I should say, no longer mark our national mourning. Let this not be a story of how far we fell, but of how far we climbed back up. We can do this. For in this year of profound loss, we've seen profound courage from all of you on the front lines. I know the stress, the trauma, the grief you carry, but you give us hope. You keep us going. You remind us that we do take care of our own. Keep us going. You remind us that we do take care of our own, that we leave nobody behind. And that while we've been humbled, we have never given up. We are America. We can and will do this. In just a few minutes, Jill and I, Kamala and Doug, will hold a moment of silence here in the White House, the people's house, your house. We ask you to join us, to remember so we can heal, to find purpose in the work ahead, to show that there is light in the darkness. This nation will smile again. This nation will know sunny days again. This nation will know joy again. And as we do, we'll remember each person we've lost, the lives they lived, the loved ones they left behind. We will get through this, I promise you. But my heart aches for you, those of you who are going through it right now. May God bless you all, particularly those who've lost someone. God bless you.
Courts,
There is some cooler air out there, but
President, and they will walk down to the south portico. You'll see them walking down the steps. There will be a candle lighting ceremony and a moment of silence to honor the Americans, the 500,000 Americans who have died from COVID-19. Looks like those candles are already there. This will be a very, very emotional moment. Phil Mattingly, this is very carefully planned, what the president and the vice president are doing right now.
It is, and I think it underscores the approach that the president has taken to this pandemic, to recognizing this pandemic. And I think one of the key points that he made kind of highlights why they're doing this tonight. And that was when he was talking about becoming numb, just to the size and the scale of the numbers of the deaths that you've seen over the course of the last year. It's easy to become numb with a number that's that large. It seems incomprehensible to the average human being. And the president and his team, and planning this, I'm told, for a decent amount of time leading up to tonight, made clear that they wanted people to pause. It is a grim milestone. It is a horrific milestone. But every one of those 500,000 plus deaths is a person with a family, is a person who has loved ones that miss them, that long for them. All of the things that the president tried to describe, and I think he also, well, if you know this as well as anybody, was tapping into his personal experiences with references of not being there when somebody died, probably a reference to his first wife and daughter, with references to being there, holding the hand of somebody who was dying, a reference to his son, Bo, as well, and really kind of tapping into his personal story to try and show that he relates, he understands, and he grasps what people are going through. And then I think towards the end, kind of trying to pivot a little bit, recognizing this moment and how meaningful it is for the country, how terrible it is for the country, but also the moment this country is approaching, the ability to perhaps turn the page, the ability to show the perseverance, and President Biden, his staff says this constantly, his willingness to just believe the absolute best in America, and tends to tout it even in the darkest moments, moving towards that in his remarks as well, and trying to balance a grim milestone with the hope for what could be ahead, what could be coming, based on everything we've seen over the course of the last couple of weeks in terms of progress with vaccinations, in terms of progress in case counts and death counts, all of these elements coming together to really kind of tie the entire remarks together. And I think also to just, once again, underscore this moment in time, which I think will become even more poignant when you watch what's about to happen on the South Portico in just a couple
We're
minutes.
told there are 500 candles that are already lit, 500 candles to honor the 500,000 Americans who have died over the past year from COVID-19.
And John Meacham, who occasionally advises President Biden on historical matters and major speeches. I want to talk about the power of empathy. Many a president has called upon that reservoir of empathy during times of suffering or national tragedy. They can't make everything better overnight, but how powerful is it to say, I get it, I understand, I mourn too?
You know, Franklin Roosevelt described the presidency as preeminently a place of moral leadership. And by moral, he meant custom. He meant neighborliness. He meant the human connections that define a community, define a republic, define a democracy. And I think what you saw there from President Biden, who is also my friend, and so I say this as a friend, is the power of empathy to lead a nation.
And John, we'll pause and listen.
The black bunting on the structure, reserved for the saddest occasions, reminds us of the black and white photos of the homecoming of Abraham Lincoln's body, the homecoming of John F. Kennedy's body. The lights, the candles, however, Nicole, as you were saying, are unique and fitting.
Well, and this president is unique and fitting. And when you hear him talk about being a president for every American, he's talking about opening up the door to his darkest hours, his most painful moments as a father and a husband. And you can hear him remembering the smell of the closet when you open the door. And to have a president willing to open his heart in his saddest moments, in his saddest days, to help the country through its saddest moments and its saddest days, is what Joe Biden means when he says he's going to be a president for every American.
I'm duty-bound to remember one of the last times there was this much live television attention. I am guessing your mind went there too, on the South Portico.
You and I sat here for hours watching the helicopter take one sick Donald Trump to Walter Reed on this shot, on this balcony.
And think of the return. Think of the live coverage of his return from the hospital. The people who know him and know medicine noticed he was oxygen starved by the time he got to the top of the steps, where he triumphantly pulled off his mask and walked unmasked into the residence of the White House to shoot a video in that moment. It was as much a celebration of his successful treatment as it was anything else. Missing from that event any note, any mention of the loss we remember today.
Level that would lead directly to his 100-day goal. So yes, we need to remember
day that was partisan. We
reform the penalties, but also
Look this way.
Providers are working to...
Words, 400.
Wants to emote and to empathize and to sympathize and to grieve with this country because that is who he is, unfortunately because of his own personal tragedies. But he does this almost on a daily basis, and he kind of talked about that with the card that he carries in his coat pocket, but also with people who he calls all the time. If he hears somebody is sick, if he hears somebody lost a loved one, he is on the phone. I mean, you hear countless stories, I'm sure you've heard as well, Wolf, over the decades that he's been in public office.
These are live pictures coming in from the South Portico of the White House. You can see those 500 candles that have been lit to honor the 500,000 Americans who have died from COVID. Nia Malika Henderson is with us as well. The moment was so different. First of all, we saw the president and the vice president and their spouses. They're all wearing masks, the Marine Guards wearing masks. This is in such contrast to what we saw from Trump.
That's right, and this is a president who wants to send the message that mask wearing is necessary. Mask wearing is patriotic. Mask wearing saves lives. And over these next many, many months, even as people get the vaccines, it's still necessary to wear the mask. It's still necessary to socially distance, socially distance from each other. It's still necessary to wash our hands. And this event tonight, so necessary as well, and the president touched on this, the fact that so many tens of thousands of Americans are not having the rituals of death that they normally would because of COVID. They're having to have funerals over Zoom. They're having to say goodbye to their loved ones over FaceTime. They're not able to visit in the hospital. They're not able to have eulogies in person, and the songs and the sort of homegoing ceremonies that people are used to when they're saying goodbye to their loved ones. So this moment, I think, takes the place of that in some ways. It allows Americans to come together. It allows Americans to really pause and reflect on this enormous loss that this nation, that the world really has experienced because of this awful, awful pandemic that has taken so many of our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, our grandparents, and he talked about the enormity of it, you know, from young people to the very old, lost to this terrible, terrible disease. And I imagine this won't be the last time that this president has to do this. Even though some of the trend lines are better than they were weeks ago, there is still a long way to go in terms of this virus being out of control and people still facing death and illness and sickness. So we saw the president, the incoming president, do this. We saw him do this today as well. But I imagine over the next many, many months, there will be times again when he has to mark another terrible moment and another terrible death toll.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You know, Dr.
A snow angel. Swap it.
I knew you as an active and energetic young runner, and months later I came to know you as one of the first people I knew to get COVID-19. And I know you've been on a journey. I know this has thrust you into a kind of ongoing support group that'll probably never go away. And I know this has forced you into deep thought about how fortunate you were to have recovered all but fully. That is not to diminish your lingering symptoms. And I know it has caused you deep thought on those who were not so fortunate.
Yeah, Brian, you know, as I was watching the Bidens and the Harris family, you know, Joe Biden was speaking to what, for me personally, and I think for the country, has been really two pandemics. One is the pandemic of COVID-19, and the other is this pandemic that Trumpism unleashed upon us of just hatred, lack of empathy, divisiveness, and really the uncaring and the lack of the ability to see one another as human beings across a political divide and the other things that divide us. And I think what's so powerful about this moment tonight is that this isn't about healing. I think this is also about justice for those lives that we've lost, for those families who've lost people. Because, you know, the hardest thing for me to process in the past year is the fact that this wasn't a natural disaster. You certainly can't blame former President Trump for COVID-19. In no way am I saying that. But the callousness of the response or lack thereof cost lives and created a lot of suffering. And so we could have prevented suffering and death, and we didn't because of the political divide that Donald Trump used to empower himself at the expense of the rest of us. The decision to ignore science, to lie to the American people early on about what the threat was, what he knew about it. You know, I think it's not just about healing, it's about accountability and it's about justice and making sure that we can actually see and recognize one another's suffering. And Joe Biden was able to do that tonight. And I think justice for these families will come when we're saving each other's lives. When you see people on the street who refuse to wear a mask because Donald Trump told them it wasn't important, that is so painful to people who've lost someone or people who've been sick or suffering for months with this virus. And that is the second pandemic that has been visited upon us. And it's really criminal in some ways. And I think it's going to take years to recover from that kind of trauma. So there's a lot of healing that we have to do. There's a lot of accountability and justice that needs to come. And Joe Biden, I think, put a marker down tonight and said, I'm going to be a president who cares about every American, who sees every American. And that's a really great place to begin.
And an Office of Management and Budget nominee, Neera Tanden.
Well, I don't have a whip count for you here.
Buchanan lost the support of Democrat Joe Manchin. She needs some Republican support to be confirmed. But moderates Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Rob Portman announced no votes as well. These lawmakers are bothered by Tanden's past rhetoric, including tweets calling Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch and accusing Bernie Sanders of receiving help from Russia.
Let me just say that the president nominated her because he believes she'd be a stellar OMB director.
She's said sorry, and the White House isn't pulling her nomination.
She needs the majority of votes in order to get through and be confirmed as the OMB director, and that's what we're working toward.
They're still short and running out of Republicans to help.
Cognizant of that, and at least for this moment, and I think when you hear from the president, he cites this more often than not, that they want people to remember that these are real people, these are real families, these are real loved ones. It's not just the public policy response or the science response or how quickly we get back to normalcy.
Yeah, and he points out that so often you couldn't even say goodbye to your mother or your father or your grandparents because you couldn't get near a hospital during these awful, awful times. Dan, I think it's clear that President Biden underscores on almost a daily basis that dealing with COVID-19 is his priority number one.
No question, which is, and he's doing it in terms of being the consoler-in-chief, which is what we saw tonight, in terms of trying to amend the policies that were passed in a bipartisan way, like the so-called PPP program, which needed to be changed, he said, and that was agreed to, I think, by a lot of people in both parties because it wasn't targeted enough to businesses that really needed the money. And then, of course, the big push that he has, the one that is defining for his administration right now, that is moving through the House this week, which is the $1.9 trillion in aid that he insists is needed for the coronavirus to get under control, for the economy to get back on track. And, he's staking everything on that. And when I say everything, I mean, another promise he made was to be bipartisan. And he has decided, at least in the short term, that the more important legacy marker and the more important goal for this country is to do what he is told by his advisors is necessary, which is to go very, very big. So that
For tomorrow, it's going to be breezy, some light showers possible in the west and north, but upper 40s to mid 50s.
Have a good night, everyone.
Breaking news, 500,000 Americans have died from coronavirus, a once unthinkable milestone. 500,000 mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters gone in just over a year. President Biden pauses for a moment of silence and orders flags at half-staff to honor those lost.
As a nation, we cannot and we must not let this go on.
The sobering prediction that tens of thousands more could die. We reflect tonight on the victims of the pandemic and why there's reason to be hopeful. Getting back on track, more vaccine doses delivered to states after winter weather delays. Catastrophic engine failure. Dozens of Boeing 777s grounded after an engine explodes midair. The details tonight of how much danger the passengers faced. The mess in Texas. Texans charged thousands for their electricity in the middle of the state's disaster. Trump's tax returns. The Supreme Court rules New York prosecutors can see the former president's financial documents. No legal basis. An investigation into the death of Elijah McClain while in police custody says McClain shouldn't have been detained in the first place. Out of this world. Tonight, the video of NASA's Mars rover as it landed on the red planet. And the incredible story of a childhood cancer survivor who's, headed to space.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We are going to begin tonight with breaking news, the kind of news few ever thought possible. News which somehow, no matter how many times we say it, is still so hard to comprehend. As we come on the air tonight, more than 500,000 Americans have now been killed by the coronavirus. 500,000 Americans taken by a virus we didn't even know existed a little over a year ago. Tonight, President Biden led the nation in a candlelight vigil, paying tribute to those who are gone. Above him at the White House, the flag now flies at half-staff for a country which has endured great loss on the battlefield during natural disasters and to violence. Tonight still feels different. The weight of the grief felt by Americans of all walks of life is crushing. It can be heard in the bells tolling here in Washington and across the country. And it can be seen in the faces of those who have lost a friend or a family member. That there has been so much loss so quickly is staggering. That tens of thousands could still die in the coming weeks is unimaginable. There's just no way to calculate a loss so immeasurable. So tonight we will try to tell some of the stories of those who are no longer here and of those who they left behind. We also have some new reporting on some hopeful signs that despite our darkest hour, there is light ahead. And our correspondents are standing by as they...
Later tonight, as CNN pauses to honor the lives of the 500,000 Americans lost where we were at only a week ago.
And each one of those lives, a parent, a grandparent, brother or sister, a son or daughter. And when we're talking about this kind of number, that's the equivalent of nearly the entire city of Atlanta gone. More lives lost than those who live in Kansas City or Oakland or Miami or Minneapolis. President Biden addressing the nation just moments ago saying, I ask all Americans to remember those who we lost. I ask us to act, to remain vigilant, social distance, wear a mask, get a vaccine when it's available, he said. Saying that first responders, the heroes, the families who lost loved ones, that they have given us all hope, that they are keeping us going. The President and First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Emhoff, observing a moment of silence outside the White House. And as you can see there, 500 candles lit at the South Portico to mark the 500,000 lives lost. ABC's Eva Pilgrim tonight, leading us off.
The bell ringing tonight at the National Cathedral in Washington, honoring the more than 500,000 Americans now lost to the coronavirus. One life for almost every minute of last year. At the White House, the President and First Lady remembering the victims.
As we acknowledge the scale of this mass death in America, we remember each person and the life they lived. They're people we knew. They're people we feel like we knew.
The President paying tribute to those lives lost.
The people we lost were extraordinary. They spanned generations. Born in America, immigrated to America. But just like that, so many of them took their final breath alone in America.
The staggering loss nearly double what experts estimated last spring.
We were saying we could get as high as 240,000, and people were thinking we were being hyperbolic about it, and now here we are with 500,000 deaths, just a stunning figure.
And a reminder of the urgent need to get vaccines into arms. Those 6 million doses delayed by last week's storm now on track to be delivered by the end of the week. There are glimmers of hope. The daily case average has plunged 74% since January. The number of deaths down 38% in the last 5 days. Still, health officials are concerned about contagious strains. The more contagious South African variant just found in New York has now been confirmed in 12 states. Doctors are still scrambling to understand a constantly changing virus. 10% of survivors suffer chronic symptoms, so-called long haulers like Hudson Beard, who was a healthy 7th grader before getting COVID. 3 months later, he's struggling with debilitating pain. Just last week, Hudson got a chance to ask Dr. Anthony Fauci for help at this lecture.
I have constant migraines, severe headaches, and I'm super dizzy. No other doctors can help me. Can you help me?
Dr. Fauci telling Hudson he hopes his body will fully recover in time, but for now, there are no easy answers.
We don't know enough about it, Hudson, for me to honestly tell you what's going to happen over the next couple of months to a year.
And Eva Pilgrim with us live tonight. And Eva, we must remember those who were lost and also those who got COVID, as you point out, and who are still battling symptoms so many months later. They're now called the long haulers, of course. There's also news tonight as we come on, the FDA releasing new guidance that actually aims to help vaccine makers to act quickly to update their vaccines if these variants prove to be a challenge to the current vaccine makeup.
That's right, David. The FDA is going to follow the current framework it uses for the flu, allowing COVID vaccine makers to turn around their boosters much faster. David?
That is encouraging news as well. Eva, thank you again tonight. And there was something President Biden said that struck us. It's something we have reported on often here, that not only have lives been lost, loved ones taken too soon, so have the rituals, he said. The rituals that help us grieve. So many have died alone at the hospital without proper services for others to pay their respects. So tonight here, we try to do that by telling some of their stories. It was an unthinkable number when this pandemic started. 500,000 American lives lost. In Alabama, Alphonse A.J. Jackson was just 35 years old, a father to Olivia and Aria, proudly doing their hair, playing nail salon when they wanted to, dance parties with his girls. His wife, Ashley, on how she explained this to her daughters.
So you know how Gray's an angel? It's like, yeah. I said, well, Daddy went to go be one too. That's the cry that you don't want as a parent to hear.
There have been so many husbands and wives dying together. Dick and Shirley Meek from Ohio had just celebrated 70 years of marriage. Every day, without fail, their 3 p.m. date together. They died in each other's arms, holding hands. In Phoenix, Sally and Manny Montano. They met as teenagers, Manny on leave from Vietnam. They died just seconds apart.
That love that they had for each other, and that's all I knew.
Their family later finding letters, birthday cards, Valentines they'd written to each other over the years.
Family's so important. You got to keep them close. You got to love them unconditionally.
In San Antonio, Mackenzie Gongora was just 9 years old, in the 4th grade.
She called me Aunt Dickie. It had like this little whimsical lilt to it. Like it was like a little fairy, like saying my name.
In Arlington, Texas, Helen Eltuck was just 20 years old, studying to be a pediatrician. And her mother told us something we've heard so often along the way here. Family members picking up the phone to call loved ones before remembering they're gone.
Today, I called her. I just called her, thinking she was dead. And then when I realized that, I thought that she wasn't around.
Captain Eric Segura of Laredo, Texas, was just 45, a 25-year veteran of the Laredo Fire Department on the front lines and EMS in this pandemic. His fellow firefighters honoring him. In South Carolina, Ashley Bennett. She had just given birth to Eliza, meeting her baby girl just once, touching her arm.
That's the only time she ever got to see her in person, which breaks my heart, because Ashley, being a mother was Ashley's favorite thing in life.
Theodore Ted Lumpkin was a Tuskegee Airman, an intelligence officer during World War II, serving his country with hopes that it would make a difference back here at home.
We really thought that our success would be very instrumental in improving both race relations in the country.
He was recognized with a Congressional Gold Medal. Ted Lumpkin was 100 years old. Sue Braley from Davenport, Florida. Over 20 years, they were foster parents to more than 300 children, and they would go on to adopt 7 of them.
She told me, Carrie, she said, it's not like I want to be a mom all over again. She said, but we have a home, we have love to give, so why not?
Nelson Chang owned the Carvel ice cream shop in Yardville, New Jersey for 32 years. He knew everyone's name and their favorite ice cream.
I knew their car and their home address and what they had for dinner the night before.
Did anybody not write with you?
There are now messages on the windows.
He's fantastic. He was like a dad to me.
Hi everyone, I'm Mr. Seitz.
And in North Carolina, Jamie Seitz. He was a teacher and a coach for 25 years.
Jamie was just everything.
His wife, Liz.
He lit up the room. He was just such a force of happiness and compassion and true goodness. And he was so fun to be around.
He didn't act like a rock star, but people followed him.
Jamie coached basketball and golf, an athlete himself, number 22. And his family told us that while at the hospital fighting COVID, he gathered the strength to make one last shot.
There we go.
His school and the vigil for their beloved coach. And Jamie, in his own words.
25 years of teaching, I'm so thankful and honored of the thousands of students I've had the privilege to coach and teach. But mostly thankful for my immediate family, who I love and adore daily. Love you.
We have reported on so many families this past year, and we promise we will keep at it so that their loved ones are remembered and so that we all remember that these numbers are families forever changed in our country. In the meantime, we do move on to the other news this Monday.
Is called Silver Sparrow. As for what
fix insurrection, dealing with all the political things that have gone on, the stop the steal, everything else, the white supremacy from the issues that we've seen rising over the last few years, he's going to have his hands full. There's no question about it. But I think the Biden administration's put together a great team. He is going to lead that department with a great team, and I think he's going to do very, very well.
Yeah, he would.
Please stand to be sworn.
Nearly 5 years after being nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court, Merrick Garland finally got his Senate confirmation hearing today for Attorney General. If confirmed, Garland will oversee prosecutions of hundreds charged in relation to the Capitol attack.
This was the most heinous attack on the democratic processes that I've ever seen.
He'd take over a department beset by low morale and under fire from Democrats for decisions made during the Trump administration and from Republicans for its investigation of the Trump administration.
You do not view your role as Attorney General as being Joe Biden's wingman.
I'm not the president's lawyer. I am the United States lawyer.
After a summer of social unrest following the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer, Garland said civil rights enforcement will be a priority.
There's no question that there's disparate treatment in our justice system.
When speaking of his immigrant grandparents who fled the persecution of Jews abroad, Garland choked up.
I feel an obligation to the country to pay back. And this is the highest, best use of my own set of skills to pay back.
President Obama tapped him for the Supreme Court in 2016, but Republicans blocked the nomination. Garland is known as a moderate, a well-respected federal judge who in the 90s led the prosecution of Timothy McVeigh after the Oklahoma City bombing. Garland appears headed for confirmation, but President Biden's choice to lead the White House Budget Office near a tandem appears to be in real trouble after 4 moderate senators said they were no votes, and tonight 11 Republican senators are urging the president to withdraw his pick to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. Nora?
Chris Van Cleve from inside that hearing room.
Everyone's saying these days.
I think the members of the committee on the other side, the Republican members, will tell their colleagues, this man can do the job. He's the best we can find. We've got to support him to show that we're going to come together to help President Biden.
Senator Durbin, who, as I mentioned, was running that big hearing today and speaking to us about COVID and other issues, appreciate you making time, sir.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you. If you've been watching our special coverage tonight, you know we've been keeping an eye there on that White House ceremony and speaking to several of our guests. I want to turn now to our special report tonight here on The Beat with new information about how a seemingly minor jaywalking stop turned into this, a warning. The video is disturbing. That is the scuffling which proved to be the last moment of Kurt Reinhold's life. The 42-year-old father of 2 was shot to death by police there in broad daylight. He was unarmed, and he was not suspected of any serious felony or misconduct at all. He was stopped for alleged jaywalking, an infraction in California that carries a $250 ticket and is also rarely enforced to begin with. Now, to understand this incident, and why so many of these incidents in American policing prove controversial, it also helps to see what led up to that scuffle, which is our special report tonight, building on our coverage of this case. Tonight we can actually show you more of precisely that lead up, because the Orange County Sheriff's Department has just released more video. Only after pressure, we should note, from the public, from recent protests, from press coverage, and a lawsuit. And now this video evidence sheds more light on the officer's mentality going into the stop. We can hear the officers on the dash cam video and other video before they even make contact with Reinhold, and they argue over whether to approach him at all. So now on this tape, newly available, I want you to listen as one officer appears to verbally push back against the other, more aggressive officer, saying the situation, before they even made the stop, the situation is, quote, controlled and doesn't merit stopping Reinhold.
There we go. You sit me, you can control, man. I don't know. It is. That guy just stopped in the middle. Don't make case for Gabriel. We don't identify him, no?
So before there was any stop, before what we showed you just earlier, before any scuffle, you have one officer already concerned this may not be a worthwhile or valid stop. The officer says, don't make case law, which sounds like referencing what could become a questionable precedent. Don't turn this stop into a case about crossing the line or where the line is. But they went ahead and they did pull up to Reinhold. And before even telling him why they are stopping him or if he's technically under arrest yet, you're going to see they start saying if he does not stop, they will, quote, make him stop. Quite the escalation for this alleged jaywalking.
How you doing?
You can hear, even with this off-camera partial audio, how quickly this whole thing escalated by the choice of the officers. Already it doesn't look like a stop that's making the neighborhood much safer. It looks like a stop that's escalating a situation with an unarmed person minding his own business, who then is asking, where did he even jaywalk? And then a concerned witness took cell phone video, which shows more of this from another angle.
What do you want to take for? Stop touching! Stop touching! Stop touching! I mean, why you stop? Stop touching! Stop touching! Stop touching! What is your problem? Why you touching me? Why you touching me? Why you touching me? For what? Who are you?
As they argue, and the video continues, there appears to be an effort by Reinhold to just get away. Then the officers tackle him, which includes the one officer who initially cautioned against the stop, saying things are under control. As it escalates, moments later, an officer says Reinhold has his gun, and they kill him with 2 shots. And it was over just like that. Now we have more information about how it ever got to that point. How an officer twice insisted, remember, this was a controlled situation that didn't merit the police getting involved.
There we go. You sit me, you can control, man.
It's control, man. And it was until it wasn't. These officers killed Reinhold in September. What's new now is the evidence, the video. As part of our reporting, you should know the police also released this photo, which they argue shows Reinhold trying to get the officer's gun. The longer video presents a lot of evidence that shows the stop was so dubious, though, even one officer was objecting to it before it began. Reinhold's family argues the video also shows the escalation and confrontation was driven by the police. Indeed, under the law, whatever you think of this policing, if a suspect chooses to flee a jaywalking stop, it is illegal for police to use deadly force to stop them from fleeing. They need more of a justification than that. Now, without the video, this might be another story that is a blip in the news of police just saying they had to use force against a dangerous suspect grabbing their gun. With the video, if people take the time to learn about the entire context, it really does look like something else. We've been reporting this story out, and tonight we have an attorney for Mr. Reinhold's wife, John Taylor. They have filed a wrongful death suit. And we are also joined by Black Lives Matter activist DeRay McKesson. Thanks to both of you for being here.
2015 nuclear agreement. The Biden administration says it will return to the nuclear deal that President Trump withdrew from only if Iran stops violating the terms of the deal.
See, and losing some weight. Nat? Right, there you go. Phil's got the forecast. Tyler has the forecast.
Where people want to examine every deal you've ever done to see if they can find that there's a comma out of place.
The criminal probe has only intensified. District Attorney Vance has been bolstering his team, adding a well-known former federal prosecutor with an expertise in financial crimes. And they've interviewed Michael Cohen, who's already testified to Congress about Trump's alleged schemes.
Did the president or his company
Lives lost to COVID, we wanted to take a moment for reflection, remembrance, and a reason to be hopeful.
It's hard to fathom all that we have lost. So many Americans' hearts left empty.
And I miss her so much.
500,000 lives lost against an invisible army. More than World War II, Vietnam, and the Korean Wars combined. COVID victims could fill a new cemetery the size of Arlington. 639 acres of tombstones. The virus reminded us all of our vulnerability, and yet there is so much to be hopeful for. The science. Developing a vaccine, the fastest in history. And now more than 1 in 10 Americans have gotten their first dose. And reported new infections are falling. So are the number of those hospitalized. Medical staff in Ames, Iowa, optimistic, singing "Here Comes the Sun" every time a patient comes off a ventilator. And while there is hope, the fight isn't over, but there is faith that we will defeat this invisible enemy together.
And we will be right back.
In 2020, the police actually killed more people in 2020 than every year but 2018, and it's just increasing. And you think about California. California is one of the 21 states that has an officer bill of rights. And imagine if you had a job where you knew you weren't going to get fired, and you knew it was almost impossible to get charged with a crime or convicted. That's police. So this was these are sheriffs, the sheriff's deputy's office. It's like, we are living in the Wild Wild West of policing that the media coverage of last year made people think that something was getting better. But all the data we look at says the exact opposite. In this case, is also a reminder that the vast majority of encounters that lead to police killings are not even cases where there is suspected violence happening in the first place. The police would like you to believe that violence is happening and therefore they had to be violent. Like that's sort of the narrative. But most of the cases look something like this, where somebody's minding their own business, the police create the confrontation that leads to something else, and it's only when people demand some sort of footage or anything that we know anything happened, and yet these officers, I think, are back on duty. You know, they're not even, what happened? You know, they're back on duty. That's wild.
Yeah, John, some people see some of these interactions and say, well, why wasn't the individual more compliant? Why did they push back at all? What do you see as what is in or missing in the police operational conduct? Because as I pointed out in our report, they don't begin by even identifying whether the person's under arrest or not. If you're not under arrest in America, you may walk wherever you choose because you're not under arrest. If you are under arrest, the police rules are that that has to be identified, and then you proceed from there. What did you think about the way they initiated that aspect even before it got to force?
Well, that's the problem, is that they have a disagreement between each other, or one saying he's jaywalking, or there it is, and the other officer says, no, It's not. And then they have this debate, don't make case law, Gabriel, where he's saying this is a Mickey Mouse thing that we're going to do to even stop and talk to this guy. And so unless the person consents to stop and talk, you don't have to stop. The police stop there and want to talk to you. If you've done nothing and there's no reasonable suspicion that a crime's been committed, you can walk away. And if just run this whole tape again and make the person white, and this stop doesn't happen and the shooting doesn't happen.
Correct.
And the invitation to stop really isn't that inviting. Both of these officers are wearing their rubber gloves when they get out of the car. And in the third person's video, the cell phone video, the officer to the left is clearly seen holding his taser. And so Mr. Reinhold, who's been standing there minding his own business, is now confronted with two officers who are approaching him. They're cutting him off from where he's moving to. They raise and escalate their voices. And the one officer, as I said, to the officer to the right, in his left hand is his taser. And so it seems like they have, an intention to go put their hands on this person. They have no reason. And Kurt Reinhold tries to understand where they're coming from. He asks, why are you touching me? Why are you stopping me? And then says, keep your hands off me, keep your hands off me. And instead, the officer, the deputy persists, and then with no plan, no warning, or a discussion between themselves, they just take them to the ground. And once they go to the ground,
well, so
it's all off.
Right. And I got 30 seconds left. John's case turns on what he can prove in court about what was wrong with this legally. DeRay, with 30 seconds, what's the policy, whether this was technically illegal under current law or not? What's your view of a policy problem if the police interaction here is what creates the danger, and otherwise there wasn't danger?
Yes, I think the question is, what will the governor and the legislature do? Is that they could repeal the Officer Bill of Rights tomorrow. They could enhance disciplinary sanctions for officers tomorrow. We could limit the power of sheriffs so that they don't have wanton power to do whatever they want in communities. All that stuff is possible. But, in California, the Democrats get a lot of money from the police. So, will they actually push back against their power? That's the question. But the governor has a lot of power. The legislature, they have power to make substantive change today. The question is, will they?
Yeah. DeRay McKesson and John Taylor, thanks to both of you for joining us. There's a lot going on, but this is a story we've been reporting that will stay on. I want to thank you for spending time with us here on The Beat with Ari Mel.
Considering the idea of starting impeachment proceedings against Attorney General Jason Brownsburg.
Last week, prosecutors announced 3 misdemeanor charges against Brownsburg for hitting and killing 55-year-old Joe Beaver on the shoulder of Highway 14 west of Highmore last September. KELO's Tom Hansen has the latest on the mood in Pierre.
Last week, a team of prosecutors wrapped up a more than 5-month investigation. From the start, Brownsburg has insisted that he did not know what he hit the night of September 12th of last year while driving back from a Spink County GOP event in Redfield to his home in Pierre.
It sure hit and smashed my windshield.
Oh, no. Okay, do you think it was a deer or something? Did he nominate?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it was right in the roadway.
It was Brownsburg who discovered the body of Joe Beaver the next day in the ditch. In Pierre, with the legislature in session, some lawmakers are discussing the possibility of impeaching Brownsburg. That process would involve a majority vote in the House of Representatives and a trial in the state Senate. If lawmakers removed Brownsburg, Governor Kristi Noem would name his replacement. Representative Tim Goodwin of Rapid City calls the Brownsburg situation the proverbial 500-pound gorilla in the room. In a statement he sent to KELO News, he says Brownsburg is innocent until proven guilty. And instead of impeachment, he's calling on Brownsburg to resign. Goodwin says it would be the honorable thing to do. Brownsburg hasn't commented on the situation, but last year, calls for him to take a leave of absence were met with silence. And as South Dakota's top law enforcement officer, Brownsburg continues to work every day at the job voters elected him to do in 2018. Shortly after prosecutors announced the misdemeanor charges last week, a spokesman for Brownsburg said the Attorney General would not resign from office. Tom Hansen, KELO News.
Earlier this week, the South Dakota Democratic Party also called on Brownsburg to resign, saying that he must accept responsibility for his actions.
Well, the man suspected of murdering
vaccine dose. But there are hurdles still ahead. Miguel Almaguer now with the latest.
Tonight, the president, with the enormity of the death toll on his shoulders, paused to remember the 500,000 Americans who have lost their lives to the virus. Grandparents, mothers and fathers, even children. More fatalities from the year-long pandemic than the number of Americans who died on the battlefield in World War I, World War II, and Vietnam combined.
The people we lost were extraordinary. They spanned generations. But just like that, so many of them took their final breath alone in America.
As our nation loses far too many every day, the struggle to vaccinate continues.
I think that's crazy that they don't have, more vaccines.
By midweek, authorities say they will have caught up for the 6 million doses delayed because of winter weather. Still, super sites like San Diego's Petco Park, nowhere near the storm, remain shuttered because there is no supply. In Los Angeles County, where 1 in 500 people have died from COVID, major vaccination sites are closed today. Vaccines can save lives, if you can get one. While authorities warn now is not the time to be complacent, movie theaters in New York can soon reopen at 25% capacity, as the NCAA announces March Madness with fans will take place next month. As the nation tries to move forward, families like the Lopez's will always look back. Danny, a father of 7, was married 33 years, but in 2 months, the virus stole his life.
I wasn't by his side when he needed me the most.
Tonight, for the families of 500,000 Americans, life will forever be changed. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
And it's more than just loss and grief. Will there be additional financial relief coming for Americans through all this? Democrats are looking to pass another COVID relief package soon, while Republicans insist the $1.9 trillion price tag is too steep. Our Jeff Bennett is following it. Jeff, where do things stand?
Lester, Democrats are pushing for a vote in the full House this week on the president's plan, with or without Republican support. The legislation includes billions to help schools reopen safely, extends unemployment benefits at $400 a week, and sends those direct payments of $1,400 to Americans who qualify. It also calls for a gradual increase in the minimum wage, up to $15 an hour after 4 years. There are questions, though, about whether that wage hike makes it through the Senate. Republicans are balking at the plan's overall price tag, $1.9 trillion, but President Biden is pushing back, saying the cost reflects the severity of the need. Lester?
All right, Jeff, thanks. Tonight, more than 120 Boeing 777. That order bans new oil and gas development on federal land and offshore waters. According to the letter, the order jeopardizes national security interests and strips away the ability for citizens to be energy independent.
Medical marijuana advocacy groups are reaching out to South Dakota lawmakers looking for a compromise and looking for supporters to find a middle ground in getting legislation passed. Cooper Seymour has more this evening from our Aberdeen newsroom.
Not satisfied with the current language of House Bill 1100 and its amendment, 2 groups are calling for a compromise to the deadlines proposed. The proposed compromise, pushed for by New Approach South Dakota and South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws, would change many of the deadlines listed in House Bill 1100A. It would change issuing ID cards and setting regulations to January 31st of next year.
And our hope is that come next January, maybe there's a few minor technical changes for the legislature to address, but our hope is that further delays to the deadlines aren't necessary.
And the groups want to ensure legal protections are in place for patients starting July 1st of this year, stating that it's one area they do not want to deviate from the original measure.
Patient protections have to be in place July 1st. We have to protect the patients of South Dakota. They've waited long enough.
SIOUX says although the groups would like to see medical marijuana implementation happen as quickly as possible, the compromise is a middle ground that legislators will hopefully be able to back.
If we just dig our heels in and offer no compromise and say, look, just vote no on 1100 in any form, we figure that might not work. And then we're left with 1100A.
SIOUX says the groups are currently approaching various legislators to introduce their compromise as an amendment to House Bill 1100. We reached out to a handful of legislators today for comment, but nobody got back to us. Cooper Seamer, Dakota News Now.
The active case count for COVID-19 in South Dakota continues to decline after dropping below 2,000 over the weekend. The state announced 30 additional cases and 63 new recoveries. The active case count now sits at 19.
States, and they're willing to pay the cartels because the cartels control traffic up north. They are a lot of human abuses that occur on that trip, and so it's not just Americans that are suffering, but it's the migrants that are also suffering because they're trying to make the trip north, and either they expose to the elements or they're at these terrible organizations that just don't care about them and only care about the money that they bring.
Absolutely. I always say open borders are inhumane borders. Julio Rosas from San Diego tonight. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and good luck for the rest of the week.
Thanks. Keep up the good work. All right, well, you might remember there was one more radical idea proposed by progressives in the run-up to the 2020 election, and it was so radical that even Joe Biden tried to keep his distance.
We wanted to make sure that we abolish ICE.
To abolish ICE.
I think we should get rid of ICE.
I think abolish ICE is a call to action on several levels. One is the literal interpretation of abolishing ICE, which I support.
But now, while most of America isn't looking, some ICE agents say that is exactly what the Biden administration is doing. Tom Homan is the former acting director of ICE and a Fox News contributor. He joins me now. Tom, thanks for being here. We have this new proposal from the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who wants to reorganize the Federal Deportation Agency so that they're not doing interior enforcement anymore. So we just talked about border security with Julio. Let's talk with you about how that guts interior enforcement against criminal elements in our society.
Well, it's like every other idea the Biden administration's had when it comes to immigration. It's ridiculous, and it won't work. You would think they talk to the men and women who actually do the job when they come up with these ridiculous ideas. Look, you can't, I read the story myself today. You can't destroy the agency and move everybody over to one side of the house. You got two different types of law enforcement officers in ICE. You have deportation officers, you have special agents. Deportation officers enforce immigration law. They have Title 8 authority. And special agents, they have Title 8 authority, but they also have Title 19 authority and Title 21 authority by statute that the other officers don't have. So you can't just tear the agency apart because you want to stop immigration enforcement. But I think that's your end game, right? So, I've said it many times. They'll never abolish ICE, but they will, they'll cripple them with money and they'll cripple them with policy, and that's what they're doing. They've already cut over $300 million from the detention. So your guest just prior to was talking about lack of beds and with COVID. Not only COVID an issue, they went from 52,000 beds to 31,500 beds. It took 40% of their beds away. And you add COVID to that, maybe they have 15,000 beds. So they're abolishing ICE without really abolishing. They're just taking their authority away.
I mean, they're technically not abolishing ICE, but
The district says that all schools have been able to remain in level 1 since Thanksgiving break. Currently, there are 19 active cases of COVID-19 in the district. Warmer than normal temperatures again tomorrow and the rest of the week. We'll have those forecast details next. A restoration project is underway near Coal Lake in Sioux Falls.
We'll show you what's being done to the historic Japanese gardens. That's ahead.
This is have to really do outside work to sort of match it to reality. But SIOUX is going to get the documents that will show the underpinnings of those records. So, for example, I mentioned legal fees. There are some years where they're claiming close to $1 million or more in legal fees just through individual businesses. But SIOUX will see what each one of those was. So if there's a case where, say, there was a payment to Stormy Daniels that was buried in there and then covered up as a legal fee to Michael Cohen, they would have the documentation to show that. It's a real roadmap to almost everything they've done, and it has to be incredibly unnerving for Donald Trump to think that SIOUX is going to have that roadmap sitting in his office.
I mean, just to be clear here, Rush, you're talking about that, which is pretty stunning that they could get that sort of documentation, but also these big questions people have about, right, how much money does Donald Trump owe, to whom does he owe it? I mean, there would be a lot of information on that if you get this backup information too, right?
There could be, yeah. One of the great things, we came across this when we did an investigation, how much money he got from his father. And the tax records show you, again, these big numbers, but audited financial statements from his accountants, which are not part of tax filings, often have a narrative explanation of what was done and why it was done. And that can really lead you to understanding sort of the legality and what they were worried about, and they were going to show those things to banks and what they wanted banks to see or not see. And then he's also going to have correspondence from the Trump board to the accountants, which again will go to their mindset and motivation for seeking certain things.
So, Laura, when you put all this together, how much legal trouble could Trump possibly be in here?
The equivalent of Pandora's box at this point in time. I mean, you're talking about all of the treasure trove of information, and Cy Vance has already been very clear with the appeals court that what may have begun with the hush payments, but through grand jury testimony and statements that have been made and other unearthing of evidence, that has led them to know that they need to have these documents, probably for corroboration on some points, for issues related to insurance fraud or tax fraud allegations. But remember, all of these so far is part of the grand jury investigation, not a criminal trial prosecution. So the idea of a grand jury is to be able to have access to all sorts of information to determine whether a law has been broken. But if they have all of the information that has, and Michael Cohen's testimony in the past perhaps, other statements by the president, the ideas of whatever could be through the accounting firm, they could really have the equivalent of Pandora's box. There's no other explanation for why he is probably extraordinarily uneasy, as our colleague said. But the idea here is it's very terrifying if you've been trying to keep the information away, and now there's ultimate transparency on a whole host of issues. This is really a really huge decision by a court that has 3 of his own appointees on it.
And which is amazing, right? Just that this is their jurisprudence, obviously, is without question, right? But they did the right thing. There was no question what that was. I mean, Rush, you looking at some of these things, you've reported on a $747,000 fee, right? It's just one example of what could be a myriad a set of examples. That a fee, though, that matched a payment disclosed by Ivanka Trump, right? Which would be some sort of illegal self-dealing if it continues down that path, and we shall see. So does this then go beyond the former president?
And to his family, I think it very well could. Look, this is a family company. He's presented this as some massive operation. It's really a very small company that operates on 2 floors in Trump Tower. And the people he trusts are really, for 10 or 15 years now, have been his children. And they are involved in every decision that's made. You mentioned those consulting fees. Those were for licensing deals. And when we look at those on his tax returns, they're essentially all revenue. He gets $1 million check and putting his name on something. There's a small fee that he pays to have his tax returns filed, and then it has no other expenses. But then in some of these cases, you see $1 million, $5 million payment to unknown consultants, and we were able to match that up and find that some of those went to his children. Well, if they didn't do any work for those, and that was just a gift, that could rise to the level of a fraud, and at a bare minimum could cause him to have to repay some taxes at a time when he seems to be under a cash crunch.
Right, at a bare minimum, as you point out, Laura, so many, the penalties here, Let me ask you one other thing here, because of another loss the former president had today, Laura, though the Supreme Court also denied an appeal from Pennsylvania Republicans over the state's mail-in voting procedures. Okay, so again, you had justices that the former president put on the court, and they all voted against him. There was one dissent, though, it came from Justice Clarence Thomas, that seemed to show some support for Trump's election lie. Thomas writes, quote, "We are fortunate that many of the cases we have seen alleged only improper rule changes, not fraud, but that observation provides only small comfort. An election free from strong evidence of systemic fraud is not alone sufficient for election confidence." What do you make of that dissent?
It's odd that a member of the Supreme Court, in light of all the other judicial rulings across the country, would sort of insinuate that our election integrity, or there is no integrity in our election system. It's an odd thing knowing that there has been so many decisions, including by people on the other side of the court, in the sense of those who actually signed on to the majority opinion. And so what he's actually saying essentially is an odd statement, given the fact that the Pennsylvania case was all about whether the state legislature, relying on the state Supreme Court, could make some changes, essentially, regarding how they were able to receive already valid votes. 3 days after or before, in light of the pandemic here. It doesn't transform it into some sort of a widespread voter fraud. Even the Attorney General did not think so, and there's been no evidence, aside from Clarence Thomas' statement, to suggest anything to the contrary. I'm not sure why he would make that statement whatsoever.
All right, well, I appreciate both of you very much. Thank you. And next.
It's time to make a stand.
Started last week on Monday. Right now it's 43 in Watertown, 42 in Sioux Falls, and there's a breeze out there, especially the farther west that you go. Pretty windy in central and western portions of South Dakota. And depending on where you are in the southeast, it's breezy in some spots. For example, Yankton and Worthington, not so bad in Sioux Falls, only around 10 miles an hour. As we go into the night, we're going to see that wind diminishing a little bit, especially off to the west, more than a little bit. In the east here, it'll stay about the same. And then into tomorrow morning, pretty light breezes. Then the wind starts to pick up in the afternoon, at noon, especially in central and western South Dakota again. And then tomorrow evening around this time, not so bad in the east, but still pretty windy there in central and western portions of South Dakota. Here's Futurecast. A few clouds hanging on this evening. They'll be moving out as the night goes on. So 10 o'clock, mainly clear around the area. Tomorrow morning at 7, we'll watch this little area of some light rain.
For keeping us alive. Sunday morning, that the power came back in the water. We were grateful to God because we got our home back.
What's more, residents have reported astronomical spikes in electric bills, some skyrocketing thousands of dollars, a result in large part due to the state's unregulated energy market. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick spoke to reporters today.
We're going to find a solution to that problem. I don't know what that solution is today, but I don't want panic out there.
Over the weekend, residents who were able to make it to grocery stores were met with empty shelves. The severe weather disrupted the state's food supply, leaving many families hungry. Texans are still lining up for bottled water. As of this morning, 8.8 million residents remained under water boil advisories, and roughly 120,000 had no running water at all.
For a deeper look at the cascade of issues facing Texans and the resulting political fallout, I'm joined by Alana Rocha. She is a multimedia journalist with the Texas Tribune and joins me from Austin. Alana, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you've been talking to a lot of Texas residents, some of whom still can't get basic essentials, get food from the grocery store, hot water. Tell me what everybody is still going through there in Texas and what they're feeling.
Just before I spoke with you, I got a text message saying that I think my boil water notice had been lifted here in South Austin, but a lot of people don't know if their water's safe to drink. There's still food shelves, as you just showed, that are empty. I have a husband currently going around town trying to find our 18-month-old some milk. HEB and the other grocery stores here are assuring people that trucks are coming in and trying to restock. But yeah, I mean, this is just months on end after the pandemic where, again, we're almost at the start of the pandemic as of last year where people, again, are not able to find basic essentials and they're waiting for safe water. Most homes are now restored as far as power goes, but of course the next thing people are nervous about is what kind of bills are they going to get for that energy they've been burning.
Are people calling for political accountability? What has the political fallout been?
Well, you saw the governor in the beginning call for resignations at the company that manages the power grid, as well as investigations into this all. You've also seen the Attorney General issue statements along those lines that they were looking into investigating exactly what happened and why the grid went down. These rolling blackouts turned into days-long blackouts for many people here in Texas. And so, yeah, you're calling for resignations. You're also calling for a lot of lawmakers under a fine eye. Of course, you saw U.S. Senator Ted Cruz travel to Cancun and get a lot of backlash for leaving a cold house in Houston to take his daughters across the border. Attorney General Paxton today and his wife, State Senator Angela Paxton, we also learned today, were in Utah last week. So a lot of black eyes right now on the state leadership and looking to point the finger elsewhere and figure out what happened and what they can do to rectify it fast.
And Texas, one of the sources of pride, from what I understand, for Texans is the fossil fuel industry and is the sense of energy independence. Do you think that's going to change that conversation in light of the last week?
It's unclear. I mean, I think the deregulation will change as far as going the other direction, but as far as going under federal oversight or things like that, you've seen former longtime governor here, Rick Perry, former energy secretary, say, you know, Texans can weather a few days in the dark. Of course, it was more dire for a lot of Texans than just sitting in the dark, but rather than going under federal oversight. But you have every agency here that even touches fossil fuel or the energy industry looking into this and seeing what they can do, maybe even outside of the lawmakers within their own authorities to enact changes fast.
It was much more than Texans being in the dark. I spoke to people today who were worried their children were going to freeze in their mobile homes. There were also a delay on vaccinations. We're in the midst of a pandemic still. Can you talk about how the winter storm affected the vaccination campaign there and how the state plans to catch up?
Yeah, our health reporter was all over that last week, one of them, and she reported that because trucks couldn't get in and shipments couldn't be delivered, that we were set to get 600,000 first doses and 300,000 second doses that didn't come in last week. Or we were supposed to inoculate another 1 million people, or at least give that many shots, and that all didn't happen. So yeah, you see them making up. People were even getting their second doses yesterday over the weekend to try and make up for that.
Alana Rocha with the Texas Tribune, you all have been doing some stellar reporting there. I'm so grateful for you and coming on the NewsHour. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
To optimize vaccine implementation and provide practical, real-world experience on how to increase vaccination capacity in our communities. I encourage each of you to watch the live stream plenary sessions throughout the day and get engaged in your community vaccination efforts.
True, no. Ms. Plaskett?
Plaskett votes no.
Ms. Plaskett? No. Ms. Wexton?
Wexton votes no.
Would find that Andrew Cuomo has done nothing wrong at all. Take a listen to this.
I think the situation in New York is really complicated. The heart of the matter goes back to last year when the state was asking nursing homes to take in patients, COVID patients, who were ready to be discharged from the hospital. We don't see hard evidence that that made a significant difference in COVID deaths.
Do you see hard evidence that he is responsible for a significant number of nursing home deaths?
Yes, PolitiFact is a partisan, it's frankly just a partisan organization at this point. This is not a partisan issue, Katie. It is a fact that Governor Cuomo instituted an executive order on March 25th, not asking nursing homes to accept, forcing them to accept positive COVID patients, not following federal guidance from CMS and CDC. Studies have shown that over 1,000 more deaths resulted as a result of this executive action. So this is the height of corruption, and it deserves an independent federal investigation.
Yeah, and it's also corrupt for people at PolitiFact to just repeat talking points from the governor's office when he's trying to get out of that corruption scandal. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, we learned today John Kerry was actively meeting with the Iranians during the Trump presidency, hoping to undermine Mike Pompeo's State Department. The very first reaction from Secretary Pompeo up next. What's my secret?
And so take it from somebody who knows Donald Trump personally. Michael Cohen, thank you very much. Really appreciate you always being on and being so open about all of this. And up next, Attorney General nominee Merrick Garland said that he intends to make the investigation into the January 6th insurrection his top priority.
Heinous attack that sought to disrupt a cornerstone of our democracy, the peaceful transfer of power to a newly elected government.
Plus, shocking new details from that investigation. We will be right back.
This is an athlete, 20 reps.
We're all from different walks.
Both of which are being handled by Trump attorneys, appointed by Trump, whether he'd allow those to go forward without any interference. So how clear was he on that, and how much of a headache will these be for him?
Medium and a big headache. He was impermeable today because he could say, I haven't been there yet. On 2016, Aaron, I think it's a dead letter. There's hardly anything to pursue. Hunter Biden is a different matter. The indication he gave to me was that he would keep the Trump U.S. attorney there, who's a well-respected career professional. That won't be enough for a lot of people. People will be screaming in the Senate. It will, I think, impede Biden's agenda some, but that's just the way it goes. He's going to let it be independent in the sense that it stays with a Trump U.S. attorney, but I do not see him having a special counsel, even though many Republicans will scream for it.
All right, thank you.
The news now. Covering the news where and when you want it.
Dakota News Now. It's news when you want it.
Finally, crossing the Atlantic the hard way. A young British woman back on dry land after rowing her way to distinction. It's a test of strength and spirit, and Jasmine Harrison aced it. At 21, the youngest woman to row solo across any ocean.
How do you feel after a journey like this?
I feel amazing.
The English swim instructor completed her 3,000-mile row across the Atlantic Saturday. In 70 days, 3 hours, and 48 minutes.
You really didn't have a lot of rowing background.
I didn't feel like the actual rowing was the challenge. It was battling different conditions, you know, your mental game, just that fatigue.
She had a few close calls, nearly colliding with a ship, and her 500-pound boat capsized twice.
Worst capsize I had, I was actually in the cabin. I have 2 satellite phones. One was so I could contact the safety officers. The other one's one so I could contact anybody else.
What did you miss the most?
I miss my dogs at home, and I miss good food.
Harrison says one incredible moment came early on, a whale of an encounter.
This is the most exciting thing.
Her message now:
I want you to, like, go and do something amazing too. A small achievement, you be inspired, see how far you can stretch yourself.
Pretty amazing. By the way, that voyage started in the Canary Islands and ended in Antigua. That's nightly news for this Monday. Thank you for watching. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
Tina and I are back hosting the...
A third party. 46% of your brothers and sisters say yes. 27% say I'll stay GOP. 27% say I don't know. How do you beat all this?
It's going to take time, and it's going to take actually speaking up and saying the truth. And so, you know, with the whip's comments, I don't understand why we can't just say the very basic thing, which is Joe Biden's president. You know, you see this chatter where everybody talks about, well, then you're disenfranchising the 74 million people that voted for Donald Trump. Look, you had 74 million people vote for him. Joe Biden had like 81 million people. So you're not being disenfranchised, you're actually being enfranchised. It's just more people voted the other way. That's what this whole thing is about. And that's where I get concerned is, if you have concerns with how an election was run, okay, even though the federal government's job, I mean, if you think about when the system was set up before the days of Twitter, we just simply receive what a state sends us and we say, okay, good to go. You know, that's our job. If there's a problem with how Pennsylvania runs its elections, that's for the people of Pennsylvania to deal with in the state legislature, not for us to come in and to implement our will. And so I don't understand why such a basic threshold. Look, we lost, okay? Donald Trump lost. And instead of complaining about that, we need to just figure out why and try to get more votes than the next person the next time.
But you also have to figure out why you're such a rare animal. You know, I was talking about you this weekend, one of my favorite pastimes. And somebody was like, oh, Kinzinger, you just hate Trump. I said, is that why you voted with him 90% of the time? I said, the guy's a conservative Republican. That's what he is. You may like that, you may not like that. This is about that and part of character, integrity, and what you want to see in a leader. You know, your voting record is, no Republican could really blink at it and say you're not, you know, a real member of the party. But you got censured by your state party because you're not pure Trump enough. Your own family was chasing after you with 2 different letters about how, you know, all the things that only family can say to one of their own about what a disappointment you are. Can you win in this party right now at home?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I'm going to try. And that's where, look, there's been basically Donald Trump has had, you know, unmatched for 4 or 5 years the megaphone. And now we need to have competing voices. I wish it was more than just me out there, but I'm going to continue to be as loud as I can. That's what the whole, I have to do the shameless plug, countryfirst.com is about. One is because it's about not propelling me, not putting me in a position. It's about saying to truly country first Republicans or independents that are country first, or even some Democrats saying, look, stand up and put the country before any single person. And I think, look, there's nobody in my party, I think, that really believes this is a long-term winning solution, but they're hoping, I think in many cases, that somebody like me, or there is an organic movement away from Trump, and then they can say, gee, I was never with him the whole time. The problem is, in this era of the media and everything, the tapes last.
True. And look, you do have the mandate issue on your side that, your party is folding itself over for Trump, who's never won a majority of any election he's been in. And that's an interesting bet that goes to the kind of changing demographics and where your party is on it. Does any of this give you pause? Not about being a Democrat, because you don't agree with them on most policy things, but of whether or not you're in the right business. You're a natural leader. Everyone who knows you says that. But do you think there is a space for you in the state of politics right now?
So I think that's what we're going to know in the next few years, honestly, is, where does this party go? What does that look like? What does it continue to say we're going to pledge allegiance to a man over a flag in some cases? Does it say, you know what, we're going to get back to the roots of what we believe and put it in 21st century with updated technology? If that's the case, and I think that will be the case, but it's only going to happen when people are coming out and speaking the truth. I mean, look, Chris, in my district, I got 65% of the vote. Donald Trump got 56% of the vote. If you think the Donald Trump thing in the long term is going to be the winning coalition and not somebody like me that's conservative, but doesn't offend people and doesn't go out and attack and say that you owe me everything and doesn't incite insurrections, then we'll be a minority party forever. But I don't know what that looks like. All I know is I can rest with real peace knowing that I'm going to fight as hard as I can to get a normal functioning Republican Party that needs to be part of this.
And in fairness, you didn't get brought into office because Trump said so. He was not a fan of yours for some time because of your lack of fealty. We haven't heard of the party making a move on you unless there's something you wanted to let us know in terms of not wanting you on committees or anything like that. So that's a good indication. Have you been able to mollify any of your family members?
So look, the vast majority of my family, even if they disagree with me, they're good family members. These are my dad's cousins. And quite honestly, the letter that came out, I didn't even release that. She had sent that to so many people out of so much anger, just can't help herself. And it went out, and I'm glad the letter came out because I think that people need to see, if you haven't experienced that division in your family, this is the best example of it. And so look, I hold nothing against them. I mean, maybe someday I'll have to look back and do some more forgiveness in my heart, but I don't feel it right now. I just have no desire really to reach out and repair it. That's up to them.
Or you put a vowel on the end of your name, and you know exactly how mad you are at them right now. Maybe this is an upside to not having more of an ethnic swing to you. Congressman Kinzinger, look, I do not mean to give you a hard time about your challenge. I think that it is really refreshing to have somebody who just wants to do what they think is right policy-wise and personally in terms of the values. It's just not a very helpful climate for you. That's why I consider it a pleasure to have you on the show to make the case.
You bet. Anytime.
Be well. It's true. I know you guys are going to come at me and say, hey, we need more guys like him. Maybe, maybe not, depending on your politics. But it is refreshing. And now we're seeing the opposite. Trump is going back to CPAC. That organization, back in the day, would have really had no part of someone like him. But things have changed. Why is he a good bet for them? Again, he lost re-election by more than 7 million votes. The most votes we've ever seen someone get was his opponent. He lost the House, lost the Senate. Why is he the one that conservatives turn to for inspiration? That is a question for the man behind CPAC on the choice to keep the MAGA movement going. Matt Schlapp, next.
Yes. Republicans will stand as one? Is that the same Republican Party that kind of has some people I might describe as feckless, weak, ineffective, lacking courage in the spine. Some of them, just some.
Right. Yeah. Well, if you can't stand up to this, then you're in trouble as a party. What they're doing at the border makes no sense. I've been involved in trying to fix immigration. They're dismantling the Trump border plan that worked. And here's what I would say. Trump's going to give a speech Sunday that's going to be very policy-centric. Every Republican should rally around it. I think it will help us with independence. And I've never felt better about President Trump's leading the party than I do right now.
Let's talk about the president. He has a big speech this weekend at CPAC. I know there might be a couple of Republicans that you know that aren't particularly fond of the president. I don't know, maybe they want to go back to the good old days of the establishment only doing show votes to repeal and replace Obamacare but not getting anything done. I don't think that's the future of the Republican Party. What would you expect the president in this speech to be talking about?
Number one, he will position himself as the alternative to Joe Biden. He, I think, will make a speech that will unify Republicans on policy. That I think he's been working the phones. I was with him all weekend. He wants us to win in 2022. And stay tuned. I think you're going to see over the next couple of months Donald Trump lead the Republican Party on policy and give us the energy we need to take back the House and the Senate. The Democrats are doing their part. If we could get behind President Trump and follow his lead, we will win in 2022. If we argue with ourselves, we're going to lose, and there's no reason to lose.
Losing would be a bad thing. I'm not sick of winning. So basically, you're describing the leader of the opposition party. Any insight as to whether the president has made up his mind about running in 2024?
Stay tuned.
Correspondents of this program have to tell everything they know. I'm just saying, if we want a future, you know.
When I get my first check, I'll tell you.
All right. I'll give you the check, and I'll be standing before one of these dumb committees in D.C.
Okay.
All right, Senator. Thank you. Coming up, old tape of Joe Biden has now resurfaced, and it may be another tall tale. We'll play it for you. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki dodged when asked about Cuomo's nursing home scandal. Joe Concha responds to this double standard. A lot more as we break news this Monday night here on Hannity.
Pete, tell huge. Not just because it's significant, but also because they probably bought themselves millions of pages to have to sift through now.
When you say 6 to 8 areas of inquiry and this being potential huge consequences, how serious are the crimes that are potentially implicated here? Obviously, again, there have been no charges. The president and his business deny all wrongdoing, and we won't know anything about what the grand jury has done until they present evidence in court, if they ever do. But given what has been publicly reporting about what they are looking at and the types of allegations that have been made by people who know something about these business practices, are these the sorts of things for which people get a fine and are sort of slap on the wrist, or are these potentially serious charges?
I mean, look, as with so many things in the law, they are, it depends. So obviously there are very many serious charges that they're considering. Just the fact that they're saying the words insurance fraud, tax fraud, bank fraud, those are all serious charges. Now, do they require time in prison? Only at the high end. So we'd have to know whether the loss was high enough to require a judge to put whomever, behind bars. Lower level felonies don't require it, but they do permit it. So we really need to know how much loss they can prove, whether that's tax loss or loss to the banks or loss to insurance companies or intended loss. We can, once we know that, we can start to figure it out. But I'd say all of these are at least potentially felonies. And so I'd say that by itself makes them quite serious.
And Dan, in terms of what you know about the operations of this office, it's one thing for us in the journalism world and as citizens to talk about millions of pages being handed over, terabytes full of data. But from a prosecutor's perspective and from the perspective of people trying to put together potential felony charges here, how long does it take to go through something like that? I mean, it sounds like kind of a life's work, and presumably you need certain people quarterbacking it and organizing other people to work on it, delegating different pieces of it out. How big a job is this? How much time do you expect that much paperwork? How much time do you expect it to take prosecutors to go through it?
Well, on one hand, it's an enormous job. And if this happened when I was first starting out as a prosecutor 30 years ago, I'd say the sky's the limit as to how long it would take. But today, the DA and the consultant that he's hired have very serious data analytics tools that can be used to sort through what they have to kind of very quickly do the kinds of searches that will get them to, separate the wheat from the chaff pretty quickly. Those start out as just simple word searches and number searches, but they involve artificial intelligence. So I think that they'll be able to do this, relatively quickly. This is very complicated. The New York real estate industry is extremely complicated to begin with, so they have experts guiding them on how that works and how all these 500 or so LLCs work together. But I think at the end of the day, they're really going to be, right now they already know what they want to look for, so they're going to start there, and then they'll do the sort of bigger sifting through the stuff. So it'll take a while for sure, but it's not an impossible task, not in 2021.
Dan, there's also been some very interesting reporting in recent days that the office has brought in a very prominent former federal prosecutor and high-level white-collar defense attorney, a man named Mark Pomerantz, who's real pedigree in New York law. And he's going to be involved in the Trump investigation only, signed on as a special assistant DA in the office for that purpose. There's also reporting, very recent reporting, that Mr. Pomerantz recently, within the last few days, re-interviewed Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer, who of course went to prison for these campaign finance felonies and other charges, and who has made a lot of serious allegations about the president that seem to track at least somewhat with these tax fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud allegations that we've had in public reporting, heard described as the potential contours of this investigation. What do you think of the appointment of Pomerantz, and does it surprise you that he's talking again to Michael Cohen? Is Michael Cohen going to end up being a valuable witness here?
Well, for sure, you said it correctly. Pomerantz is a prominent lawyer. He's what we call a heavy hitter. So that's a good thing because he will have seen cases of this magnitude before in civil and criminal contexts. I will put in a plug for my former colleagues. The office already has some fantastic assistant DAs that have been working on this case for a while. So I think even without Mark Pomerantz, the case would have been in good hands. I think that only enhances it to have him in the case. In terms of Michael Cohen, very interesting. So, I actually watched the Cohen hearing today when he testified before Congress, and some of the attacks that were made by the Republicans will probably be made if he testifies in a trial, assuming that Trump or someone close to him is indicted. And I thought those, if handled correctly by the prosecutor, those will ring hollow. Basically, the attack is, this is a perjuring witness. This is somebody who lied to Congress. How dare we have as a witness somebody who lied to Congress? Well, okay, but that doesn't end the story. I mean, I put witnesses on the stand who had committed perjury, who had asked others to commit perjury, and that's not the question. If that was the question, then we wouldn't put them on the stand. The question is not whether they lied before, it's whether they're telling the truth now. And so you got to ask yourself, well, why did Michael Cohen lie to Congress? Well, it was obviously to protect Donald Trump. And it's not like Donald Trump corrected that testimony afterwards, even though he presumably knew the truth. So you have to ask, is whatever Michael Cohen's going to say corroborated by other evidence? And that's a lot of what they're doing now by pouring through these documents, other evidence and other documents and other witnesses too. So no, I think Michael Cohen could be a significant witness, but I think he's got warts. So it's got to be a very careful prosecutor who puts everything out on the table, warts and all, so the jury can see it all. But I do think that he could be a persuasive witness if properly corroborated.
And nothing corroborates like millions of pages of documents that the president fought tooth and nail to try to keep hidden. Dan Alonzo, former federal prosecutor, veteran of the New York State Prosecutor's Office, that SIOUX's team, and SIOUX's team that just got this incredible ruling today, decisive ruling from the Supreme Court. Dan, thanks very much for helping us understand. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, we got a lot more to get to this busy, busy Monday night. Stay with us.
That's a legal ballot.
Matt,
and you can't run a democracy that way.
Matt, listen. If you want to make things better, make them better. I'm just telling you, these arguments are making things worse.
I do that every day, my friend.
These are your
I do that every day. I think
in Georgia from your party who said there was no fraud here. Stop saying it. You're going to get us hurt. And then you did.
Chris, there was widespread voter fraud in the last election. In a bipartisan sense, Democrats and Republicans should agree on a couple things. You should be a registered voter to vote. Certainly if you're in a registration state. You should only vote once, and if you vote by mail, somebody at that election office should have to verify that signature according to the state statute. That did not happen in the state of Nevada, and that did not happen in Georgia, and that did not happen in Philadelphia.
And if you're going to qualify,
you can say it's fine. I say let's never have an election like that ever again.
And if you're going to, look, nobody should argue against improvements. What I'm saying is very simple, and you know this. What Trump
Very
did,
good.
What Trump did was, well, first of all, these same issues came up 4 years ago. You guys had a deaf ear. You said the Democrats were sore losers, and they didn't respect the process, and they were undermining democracy. So let's not get on our soapbox too fast.
You spent 4 years saying there was Russian collusion and that the election should be questioned, and Hillary Clinton said to Joe Biden he should never ever concede. And this is like hypocrisy.
Hold on. No, it's not. Here's why. Not only did I say there was collusion, I will say it now that there was collusion. Collusion is not a crime. It's a behavior. And Trump's people did what they do best. They did dumb things for bad reasons. But look, you made your arguments. I gave you your time. We'll look and see what happens at CPAC.
Bob Mueller found no collusion, my friend.
He did not find no collusion. Collusion is not a crime. He wasn't even looking at it as such. Learn to read, my brother. It's right in the details. I gotta go.
There was nothing inappropriate with Russia in the 2016 election.
He never said that.
Good to see you, my friend.
Never said it. Good to see you.
He did.
I'm glad to offer the platform. Let the people decide. Matt Schlapp, CPAC. Let's see what Trump says when he goes there. And look, he's going to have trouble. Not with CPAC. They have nobody better. They have nobody that they believe in more. That's on them. He has trouble that has nothing to do with them. Legal peril. The Supreme Court rejected his bid to keep his taxes from a New York prosecutor. That doesn't mean that we're all going to get to peruse the former president's taxes. Know that. But his niece says she has a case against him, and she knows him. And she knows why, or she believes why, he is so worried about this, and that it's something we have to take note of. And she also has a guess as to what happens next. Let's discuss it.
Research shows that people remember commercials.
President Trump, according to Jim Acosta, in exile, and probably will be leading the opposition, okay, in exile. So the question is, I don't think they can quit ever talking about Trump. One, Biden is too boring, and two, they don't have the nerve to confront him or challenge him the way they did Donald Trump.
Right. To cover Joe Biden means you have to scrutinize Joe Biden in terms of his actions, in terms of his policies. Obviously, his words are a lot different than his deeds. But they can't quit President Trump because President Trump gave them clicks and gave them ratings like never before. And by the way, as far as Joe Biden, in terms of this low-key approach with Texas being so effective, I'm old enough to remember that in 2019, the Washington Post actually had this headline: "Another hurricane is about to batter our coast. Trump is complicit." In other words, if he signed off on certain climate policies, then hurricanes would stop bothering us and stop hitting the country. And now with Biden obviously not declaring a national emergency for nearly a week in Texas, those are actions. Those are things that deserve to be scrutinized. Instead, you had the president just last Thursday alone call lit on the day at 8 a.m. So I would hope that the press would step up their game, but it's not going to happen.
For 3 inches of snow, it's mind-numbing. All right. Thank you, Joe Contra. Well, one of the co-hosts on The View is calling for Biden to replace Dr. Anthony Fauci. We'll take a look at Fauci's record. We'll explain why. That's straight ahead.
Advanced.
A group of people working out. Michelle Obama, April 2012, encouraging American families to get moving, to be fit and healthy. Watching the First Lady in action like that for a good cause, trying to encourage people, doing crunches and lunges and jumping jacks, that was inspiring to a lot of people. This guy, though, had a different take. His reaction was this, quote, "Did you notice that while Michelle Obama is working out on TV, she is sweating on the East Room's carpet? I'm just saying, ... The guy who tweeted that is named Rick Grinnell. Back in 2012, when he tweeted that, he was a Republican operative who had a very public habit of tweeting mean and frequently sexist things about the Obamas and about their kids, also about then Vice President Joe Biden, about prominent Democrats. He would also sometimes use his Twitter account to go after members of his own party as well. He repeatedly attacked former Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. He liked to go after Newt Gingrich's wife. He would make fun of her hair. That was kind of his level of insult, insulting people's looks and their weight, attacking their families, particular venom for women in the public eye. He's a real nice guy. This became a little sticky, kind of, for Rick Grinnell when President Donald Trump surveyed the American landscape and decided that, above all other Americans, the best pick for ambassador to Germany would be that guy, Rick Grinnell. And there was talk when the nomination was announced that Grinnell's past behavior online might disqualify him from getting confirmed in the Senate because it was so mean and sexist and petty and ad hominem and gross. Turned out to be no problem, though, really. Ended up being smooth sailing. Mr. Grinnell and his archive of mean tweets were confirmed in the Senate with bipartisan support with votes to spare. Not a big deal, apparently. Right now, the current President Biden, is dealing with a confirmation speed bump for one of his nominees, though. Her name is Neera Tanden. She is President Biden's nominee to run the Office of Management and Budget, and her nomination drew immediate complaints from Republicans in the Senate, who complained, basically, that her past tweets about them were mean. They said her tweets about Republican lawmakers were too combative. They said her old tweets about them, long before she was a nominee, would just make it impossible for her to work with Congress. They would never work with her, given what she had tweeted. From the start, it looked as if Neera Tanden would receive few, if any, votes from Republican senators to confirm her to the job. In a 50-50 Senate, if every Republican votes against her, Neera Tanden would need every Democrat to vote in her favor in order to get confirmed. On Friday, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin announced that he won't vote to confirm Neera Tanden. He said it was because of her partisan statements on Twitter, and he said those statements would have a toxic and detrimental impact on her work. Today, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins also announced that Neera Tanden's tweets are a problem for her as well. She says they demonstrate that Ms. Tanden does not have the temperament to lead the OMB, which is a peculiar decision on the part of those senators, given that both of those senators had absolutely no problem supporting someone with a hyper-partisan Twitter warring history in the past. Susan Collins and Joe Manchin both voted to confirm Rick Grinnell in 2017, the guy who used his Twitter account to attack the sitting president's children, to mock a woman's hair, to attack all sorts of women for their appearance, to attack Michelle Obama for sweating on the East Room carpet. But for them, Neera Tanden's criticism of Republican senators, that's caustic and inappropriate, and so she must be barred from a Senate-confirmed position. Rick Grinnell's fine. Neera Tanden, They were not the only senators to announce they'll be voting no on the Tanden confirmation. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman, who also voted to confirm Rick Grinnell, he announced his opposition to Neera Tanden today. So did Utah Senator Mitt Romney. There's still time, though, to find one Republican, any Republican vote for Ms. Tanden. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska was notably quiet today on the prospect. But until then, until a Republican senator decides that he or she will vote for Ms. Tanden, Tanden's nomination to lead OMB is hanging by a thread tonight because of the absolutely outrageous and overt double standard to which she is being subjected by even at least one Democratic senator who was happy to excuse much worse behavior than hers for a male nominee in a previous administration, but apparently has discovered some new standard that will keep her from getting his vote. Republicans have done it, at least when Democrats doing it, and that might make the difference here. The Biden administration says they remain in full support of her nomination and they are not pulling it. Watch this space.
There are no good arguments there. They're easy to bat down. I could do that and my taxes at the same time. But this is different now. When the taxes come out, the perception of a prosecutor can be reality if there's proof The counter, Mary, is, but he says he gets audited all the time. Wouldn't they have caught him already if he had done bad things with his taxes?
Well, first of all, there's no reason to believe that he actually has been under audit for the last, what has he been saying that for, a decade?
Forever, yeah. He says, I'm always under audit because I'm a strong Christian, he said.
Sure. But that aside, it doesn't matter what he says because the IRS knows the truth. And pretty soon, the New York, Cy Vance and Letitia James in New York are going to have access to those documents that show what is the case. And as we've known since 2018, thanks to that extraordinary New York Times article by Suzanne Craig and Russ Buettner, Donald has been playing fast and loose with the truth regarding his finances for decades. And it's about time the American people have access to exactly what has been going on and what most likely has continued going on because, let's face it, this is a very long-standing pattern.
Does your lawsuit stand where in terms of its process?
We're still at the pretty beginning stages of it. We have a hurdle of statutes of limitations to get over. So once, hopefully, that gets cleared, it will be full speed ahead. But the good thing is, it's not just my lawsuit. It's not just Cy Vance, not just Letitia James. My lawyer, Robert Kaplan, has 2 other lawsuits going on. We have potentially an investigation in Georgia looking into voter fraud. And I know that doesn't have to do with the finances, but what we've learned is that Donald has a tendency to get away with things. So the more we pile on, the more avenues of investigation there are, the more likely it is that we're finally maybe going to get some justice.
What is your sense of how your uncle deals with having so many irons in the fire against him?
He probably doesn't think about it very much, honestly. I think at the moment, he's probably focused on CPAC. He's probably looking at that as his way to get back into the conversation. And let's be clear, CPAC, his speech at CPAC is going to be an endless list of grievances about how the election was stolen from him, the election was stolen from his voters, and regardless of what other Republicans may or may not say, they're going to be enabling that extraordinarily dangerous rhetoric. So, it's unfortunate that that's being allowed to happen, but it also increases the urgency of these state-level cases and these lawsuits going through.
I mean, look, he's the best game in town for CPAC, and he's never made the kind of money from anything as quickly as he has from his complaints about the election. They've raised $250 million in 8 weeks based on election lies, so this is profitable for him as well, and it leads to the legacy effect. You're the branch of the family that doesn't like him, but there is this idea of he will be able to appoint who comes next, even if that means it's one of his daughters-in-law, Lara Trump, is trying to extend the brand. Here's what she says.
He has told us to stay tuned, that this is not over for him, and he has indicated that he probably would be interested in running again in 2024. Look, he is the head of the Republican Party. He is really the person that everyone will continue to turn to in order to help them get across the line, whether we're talking about 2022 or beyond, I think.
So she wants to get in the game. You had said that you didn't think he'd want to run again. And look, he has to say he might because it makes him marketable. But where do you think the truth lies?
Well, it's not that he wouldn't run again. It's that he has no intention of actually going all the way because he won't risk losing. But he will pretend to run for sure because, as you said, it's incredibly lucrative for him. And the truth of the matter, though, is that if indeed he continues to be the head of the Republican Party, what we need to do is what you alluded to in the last segment. We need to make it clear that what the Republican Party stands for is the big lie. And let's not forget, even more importantly, they seem to be perfectly comfortable with the fact that this man incited an armed insurrection against our country and the Republicans have no problem with that, that needs to be a permanent stain on any Republican's reputation that continues to enable this extraordinarily dangerous rhetoric.
It'll certainly be a matter of fact. Mary Trump, thank you very much. We'll be right back.
Suffer from muscle cramps in your legs and feet. TheraWorks Relief can help. With daily application, this fast-acting foam is clinically proven to prevent
Committee. And we're going to hear from a number of officials who should be interesting witnesses. The Sergeant at Arms from the House and the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate both resigned in the immediate aftermath of the attack. They will testify tomorrow, as well as the former chief of the Capitol Police, who also resigned after the attack. Those officials, as well as the acting chief of police for the DC Police Department, they're all going to face questions from senators in tomorrow's hearing. It's called Examining the January 6th Attack on the U.S. Capitol. Should be one to watch. Watch this space.
Learn from this. Let's improve the electricity grid we have here, and let's put people in positions of power who actually care for those that they represent and swear that they serve. That's what we need going forward.
You've been through an experience that you haven't been through before in dealing with this. What have you learned? What are the lessons you take away from this that you've learned from some of the victims of it who don't have heat, don't have water, can't pay their bills, or some of the public officials or some of the people involved in delivering electricity who have revealed to you things that you didn't know about this crisis?
You know, not unlike COVID, this crisis reveals some of the underlying systemic problems that were there all along. Problems of poverty or failure to invest in infrastructure, inequality or a failure to address equity in our communities. I mentioned we were in Rains County. There's a small community called Point there. Folks on 3rd Street in Point have not had water for 7 days. And visiting with, talking to, and listening to the folks there, they have long-standing issues and challenges there for service, resources, and just, you know, having the rest of the state know that they exist. That's part of the reason that we went up there today. Same reason that we're going down to the Rio Grande Valley, a part of our country that doesn't get the attention and focus that it deserves and that it needs. We want to be there and help rally other volunteers to do these wellness checks and make sure that folks are okay. So these inequities and inequalities laid bare at the same time that you see extraordinary everyday people stepping up, checking in on one another, and taking care of their neighbors. That's the lead that we've got to follow. When our public servants aren't getting it done, then the people are the lead, and we've got to make sure that we follow that example. So we're trying to do our best as we travel the state of Texas to pick up on that and help those who are in need and get the care that they deserve.
January 25th. Watch live on Midco Sports Network and stream games on Midco Sports.
You know, dictating my child's education.
I'll be the one that calls for it. And someone who speaks that way about parents who are worried about their kids not learning should go into a different line of work, okay? And just like that, every single member of the Oakley Union Elementary School District Board has now resigned. I called for them to step down on Thursday. By Friday, they were all gone. Good riddance. That's all the time we have tonight. Shannon Breen, the Fox News at Night team, take it all from here.
All right, Laura, that kind of reminds me of a really bad reply all that I sent, sort of notorious within Fox. That moment when you realize everybody else just saw that. Yikes.
Yeah,
okay,
well, you never said anything like that. Have a great show.
No, I didn't. All right, thanks, Laura.
All right.
All right, tonight, Attorney General nominee Merrick Garland revealing new insights into the Biden administration, and he is just the first White House pick this week to face questions over the progressive agenda of this White House. Republican Senator Josh.
Of all races, all religions. Last May, we held a memorial show like this one after we reached the grim milestone of 100,000. It is wrenching to confront the fact that we're now at 500,000, 5 times that. In so many ways, COVID hasn't just killed our friends and family. COVID killed, for now at least, our connection to our communities. Preventing a grandparent's hug goodbye, preventing funerals, wakes, and shivas. Sadly, we still cannot gather safely together in large groups in a chapel or a mosque or a synagogue. So for the next hour, let us come together here to try to heal and to remember. We're going to share some incredible stories of lives that were cut too short, but that were lived brilliantly. And we will be uplifted in prayer by religious leaders and gospel song. Let's begin today with Cardinal Wilton Gregory, the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. He's America's first black cardinal, and he spoke at the COVID-19 Victims Memorial on the National Mall, led by President Biden in January. Cardinal, thanks so much for joining me. How do you try to console those who have lost loved ones?
Well, Jake, one of the things that I've discovered as a priest is that in the face of death and suffering and illness, words are inadequate. There's not really a lot of things that you can say other than saying, I'm with you. I consider it a privilege to share in your sorrow, and I assure you of my wholehearted affection and support. Words don't come easy because we're facing the great mystery of death. And none of us have found the words that will completely alleviate the pain and the suffering that people experience.
And beyond that suffering, there is, of course, the fact that we're all going through this right now at a time when we can't come together, we can't hug friends and loved ones. For many people, it seems like a hopeless time. What do you say to those people?
Well, first of all, what this pandemic has done, it's increased our awareness of our humanity, our common humanity. This is not something that one group of people have endured, although admittedly, there are segments of our society that have been more drastically impacted. The poor, the elderly, people of color, those communities have endured a disproportionate amount of sadness, but all of us, no matter what our condition, have been brought to an awareness, I hope a deeper awareness, that we are one people, and that this illness, this disease, this virus is no respecter of persons.
20s around 30. It's going to be a mild night. And then another warm day tomorrow. Sioux Falls getting back to 49 degrees ahead of an incoming front. That front will give us a chance of very light, spotty rain or snow showers in western, central, and northeastern South Dakota.
To the sorrow. Remember those we lost and those who left behind.
I'm Melissa Rainey reporting.
That brings us to a coronavirus update tonight. South Dakota saw a real coronavirus cases reported today. This as active cases do continue.
The issue of systemic racism has become something argued over, but if I can just walk you through for a second.
Is recognized for 7.5 minutes.
Small businesses are going to have an even harder time coming back when you go to a $15 minimum wage.
But Democrats push back on that.
But I don't want small businesses that are underpaying employees, and I think $15 is very reasonable in this country.
By the way, a $15 increase, or make that $15 minimum wage, it would be an increase phased in over time, Shannon. As you know, it's $7.25 now. It would be up to $15 an hour by 2025. As for the bill itself, it now heads to the House Rules Committee for consideration later this week. It's expected to gain approval there.
After Election Day should have been counted in the 2020 presidential election. Tomorrow, the investigation into the riot at our Capitol moves into a new stage with the first congressional hearing on the topic. 4 high-ranking law enforcement officers, 3 of whom have by now resigned, will testify before 2 separate Senate committees. They include the former House Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving, former Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Michael Stenger, who both stepped down after the insurrection and have never spoken of it publicly. Some of the rank-and-file officers who came under attack that day are just now speaking out. Here's what one officer had to say about that day.
I got called a couple dozen times today, protecting this building. Is this America? They beat police officers with Blue Lives Matter flags.
With that, let's bring in our leadoff guests on this Monday night. Ashley Parker, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House bureau chief for the Washington Post. Melissa Murray, she's an NYU law
the one who fashioned us. Help us to focus on our mutual humanity. Although weary from so many months of isolation, help us not to lose hope. Help us to continue to care for our neighbors as we remember those we have lost in this pandemic. Assist us in replenishing our compassion under the guidance of the one who is the ultimate source of our peace and our unity. Amen.
Amen. Cardinal Gregory, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.
Coming up, we're going to have an uplifting performance by gospel singer Marvin Sapp, and throughout the hour, we want to remember some of the extraordinary people so cruelly taken from us because of the pandemic, such as a Special Olympian who loved giving his family the weather report, the country music star who was a mentor to Brad Paisley, and a pediatrician whose daughter calls her the life of the party.
Hi, my name is Adisha Verma, and I am the daughter of Dr. Anjali Verma, who passed away November 24th, 2020 from COVID. My mom was a force of nature, so anytime she walked in a room, all eyes were on her. She was always considered the life of the party, always making sure that everyone was having a great time and everyone was involved in all of the activities. One of the things I remember most about her is the fact that she was a neonatologist, so helping sick babies. She was a pediatrician with her own medical practice. She was an incredible person, and one of the things I remember personally is hearing all of the patient stories and just hearing how many lives she saved. The other thing I also remember is that she always loved to cook and try new cuisines and be innovative with her recipes. So every time I smell Indian spices or food being cooked in the kitchen, it always reminds me of her.
Hello, my name is John Mark, and I'm with my wife of 40 years, and to tell you about my youngest brother, Joe, who passed away at the age of 58. Joe was born with Down syndrome. Growing up in Cleveland, he was a Boy Scout, participated in the Special Olympics. He wrestled and played softball. Joe loved polka music and going to his monthly dance club. He loved the daily weather forecast and acting as the family's weatherman. He was a devoted sports fan. He loved the Masters tournament. We made him his own green jacket with a Masters logo, which he proudly wore to every family event.
Joe instantly became a close friend to everyone that he met. He lived for the next holiday or family party, and he really knew how to work a room. He was a great conversationalist. We all loved his honest, sometimes awkward toasts at family gatherings where no one was spared. He had no filter, and he often said the things that we were all thinking but were too timid to express. He just had a way of taking your focus off of daily, mundane activities and reminding you what really is most important in life.
Joe had a great sense of humor. He was kind and loving, gracefully vulnerable, and gave the greatest hugs. I want to remember him as someone who made you look at life through a different lens.
Anybody who ever makes it in the music business has to overcome incredible odds, but there's never been anything like how Charlie Pride burst onto the scene in country music and just shattered barriers like they didn't exist in a world where they definitely did exist. He was someone that had this incredible voice, this incredible love of country music, and an ability to entertain and charisma.
You've got to kiss an angel good morning and let her know you think about her when you're gone.
I remember hearing the stories of how people were shocked when they found out he was African American, but they had fallen in love with his songs, and thereby they were ready to fall in love with him. he was already in their hearts. And what an incredible story from then on. I opened for him as a teenager. I remember being really excited because I'd heard that he takes a real interest in young talent. And sure enough, like clockwork, I'm up there on the stage playing, and he hears that there's a teenager that's not bad. And he goes out and sits down in the dark next to my dad in the audience and says, "This kid's really good, who is he?" And my dad says, "Well, that's my son." And he writes down his home number and hands it to my dad and says, "Listen, if you ever need anything, call me." And sure enough, when we got to Nashville the first time, I gave him a ring and we kept in touch, and he did help. He was one of those guys through the years that would do anything for anybody. And I'm so thrilled to have been his friend all these years. And I can't believe the legacy he leaves behind. We will really miss him.
Sponsored by Fern ID and Johnson for their assistance in communicating the significance of the event as the confirmation process begins for Biden's Secretary of the Interior nominee. The governor is also asking the delegation to meet with senior staffers at the Department of the Interior to, quote, make the case for this event. She says this summer's event brought tens of millions of dollars in ad revenue, thousands of visitors, and hundreds of thousands of tax revenue dollars to the state. Representative Deb Haaland of New Mexico will go before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee tomorrow. If she is confirmed by the full Senate, she would make history as the first Native American cabinet secretary. A Sioux Falls woman joined a lawsuit seeking damages. Tonight she tells us she's worried she's going to have to end up paying out money instead of getting any money. That story's still to come on tonight's Dakota News Now at 10. Phil.
Well, a warm-up has gone on in full force over the last week, and will continue this week. We'll let you know coming up after the break. You're watching Dakota News Now.
Dakota News Now, sponsored by Montgomery's.
Former state attorneys general, for you to have both the National Sheriff's Association.
Obviously, it's absent. There was one bipartisan.
Oh, yes. I mean, the investigation has to go where it goes, and I'm glad the Attorney General nominee, Merrick Garland, committed to having an investigation not coming into a prejudge. But suppose the governor ordered his officials and said, tell the federal government that we have half as many deaths in nursing homes as we really did. That could be obstruction of justice. That's lying to the federal government intentionally. Those are crimes.
DeRoy,
probably a little bit of conspiracy as well, I would think. Yeah, I think I agree with everything John said. I think I'm not a lawyer, and of course John is a legal professor, but I think conspiracy. I mean, if more than two or more people got engaged in this, we've got conspiracy as well. So add that to the list of particulars that Governor Cuomo faces tonight, potentially.
DeRoy and John, thank you both.
Thanks, Shannon. Thank you very much.
NTSB investigators are looking for answers tonight about why an engine caught fire during a United Airlines flight on Saturday.
Still wields in the Republican Party. We know some polls where his approval ratings are still quite high among Republicans, although they have dropped after the January 6th attacks. There's some disconcerting polls as well about the number of Republicans who believe his lie that the election was stolen. But until he comes out and speaks to a crowd, and again, this is a very specific crowd. This is very much sort of a MAGA Nation crowd, his base, and see not just how they react, but how lawmakers react who are up for re-election to Donald Trump and what he says. This very well could be the first test of does he have the power he hopes to have and claims he has, or by dint of the fact that he is an ex-president, and frankly, he is an ex-president who helped egg on an insurrection against the government he led at the time, does that in any way diminish his clout?
And Professor, finally to you, while it's not a term from the law, by all accounts, Judge Garland crushed it today at his hearing simply by being a modest man, man of the law, and talking about his family's history in this country, talking about how he would and would not approach cases. Tell me about, it is believed he actually picked up Republican votes today, if indeed he goes on to be confirmed as AG. Tell me about what he's going to find at DOJ, what they will find as a kind of new culture, remembering that he will be the first Attorney General in 4 years to not view himself as the president's lawyer, as he put it today, instead the lawyer for the United States.
Well, this was a winning performance from Judge Garland. And again, this was the performance that I think many people would have expected to see in 2016 when he was President Obama's appointee to replace Justice Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court. He obviously did not get that hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, but here we are 5 years later. And this was an amazing performance, evocative, moving, poignant, but then also really clear-eyed about the difficulties facing the Department of Justice. He spoke about the morale at the department. It is at the lowest it's been in a number of years. People are questioning the independence of the Department of Justice. All of that needs to be restored. And at the same time, there are external threats that have to be dealt with. And he faced those head on today, talking about his own history, fighting domestic terrorism within the United States in Oklahoma City and elsewhere, and the fact that these strains are proliferating in the United States today, and they need to be addressed by a Department of Justice that is reinvigorated and ready to take on that task.
Indeed, he called 1/6 the worst attack on our democracy he could imagine, and said that getting inside these groups, rooting it out and investigating that would be job one for him. Can't thank our big three guests tonight enough, Ashley Parker, Melissa Murr.
Ramifications of it, then we don't get the lessons that grief teaches us, and we don't really come out of it understanding fully what it means to be human.
Yeah, so I know grief is a healthy process. It's not something to be avoided, as you suggest. And you say it helps confront what it means to be human. Explain that to us.
Well, I think that all of us operate under the assumption that we're going to live forever. It's just impossible not to believe that. Or that things don't change, and that we can count on things to always be the same. And in fact, what we've learned certainly in the last year is that things do change, and we can't really count on things not to. And so when we are affected by grief, when we lose someone who is very important to us, we have to find the tools to confront the fact that we too are mortal. And with it, take the time to learn what it means to be mortal. I think that so many of us have lived in a culture of denial for so long. And I think it's a normal thing. I think about after the First World War and the pandemic that came after. People rushed into the Jazz Age, rushed into just the joy and the dancing instead of taking the time to mourn the grief. And after the Second World War as well, people were just overwhelmed by the losses in the war, in Hiroshima, in the Holocaust, and it was just too hard. People just sailed into a world of consumerism. The Jazz Age ended with the Depression, and this situation that we've come from has caused us to just consume and forget about the consequences of consumption, and to put things in the oceans. I think that a lot of the climate crisis comes right out of our denial. When we truly mourn, we learn that we are finite individuals on a planet where living things die. And when we confront that, we learn to treasure every day. We learn to be compassionate. There's a lot to be learned from our grief, and if we don't take the time, we don't get that healing.
There's a Jewish expression of condolence that I use every time I do an obituary on my show, which I've been trying to do one every day because of COVID. And the expression is, may his memory be a blessing, or may her memory be a blessing. What do we take from those words?
Well, I think in the first part of it, it says that, yes, mourning really hurts. And right now, when the grief is still raw, the memories of someone in their illness or the sudden death or whatever it was, and especially at this time when we can't even be with people when they're dying, those memories are not a blessing. But if we take the time to heal, if we take the time to truly mourn, then all of a sudden our salient memories are the ones that are healing, that are beautiful. The best example I can give of this, Jake, is that when I was 24, I lost my mother and my sister within 3 months. And I ran from New Orleans, which was the place that our family lived. And people said, how can you live? How can you leave? And I would say, every tree, every street corner has a memory. It's excruciating. And now when I go back, and I go back as often as I can, they ask, what's it like to be back in New Orleans? And I say, oh, every tree, every street corner has a memory. It's exquisite.
Before you go, Rabbi Brenner, would you lead us in a prayer to help those in mourning?
Certainly, certainly. Holy One of blessing, we surrender to your compassion the many souls that have left us in this time of great suffering. May they be gently folded into the bundle of souls that find their eternal resting place under your wings. Healer of shattered hearts, give us comfort. Give us the strength not to rush into a new normal that looks just like the old normal, but to take the time to learn the lessons of grief. May you fill our broken places with the wisdom that only comes when we fully face what it means to be human. Help us to recognize the preciousness of each moment. Give us hearts of compassion. Teach us to honor the spark of holiness that we share with all of your creations. Turn the cracks in our aching hearts into vessels through which we channel your compassion and your peace into the world. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Rabbi Brenner, thank you so much for your time and your wise words.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you so much.
Behind each of these 500,000 deaths is a story of life, love, a story of family, including a mother who had an amazing sense of adventure, a comedian who followed the lead of his loving older brother, and an Army veteran who just had celebrated his 50th wedding anniversary.
My name is Jill Alexander. My dad, Paul J. Foley Jr., died in Chicago on April 17th, 2020 from COVID. My dad was a U.S. Army veteran who served in the demilitarized zone. And when he was finished serving his country, he came back and worked for 35 years as an executive at Goodyear Tire. My dad was married to my mom for 50 years at the time that he died. They had just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. He had 4 children and 9 grandchildren. I would like my dad to be remembered for the wonderful family man that he was. He instilled in us from the minute we were born the importance of family. He cherished us, and if there's anything that can bring me comfort in these awful circumstances is the fact that there has never been a moment where I did not feel my dad's love, where I did not feel his pride for me and for my brother and my sisters, as well as his 9 grandkids. He was more than a number. He was just the best dad. And every day of my life, there's a heaviness because of his absence.
My brother, Mark Wilmore, was a comedy writer and a comedian, and for me was the funniest person that I've ever known. And we spent all of our childhood sleeping in the same room on bunk beds, and we would go to bed trying to make each other laugh. It was kind of our ritual. He was just so funny and inventive and just so original. I mean, even before the phrase keeping it 100, was a thing. My brother always saw the truth in things. He was a brilliant guy. He wrote on some great shows like The Simpsons and always made people laugh in the writer's room. And the funny thing about Mark is that I don't think he believed in himself as much as other people believed in him, you know, which is amazing because he was so brilliant. In fact, because he was my little brother and, you know, I played football, he played football, I went into comedy, he went into comedy, I became a writer, he became a writer. He always felt like he was in my shadow, but it really wasn't true. If anything, the only reason why I cast a shadow was because I was standing in his light. I miss you so much, Mark, and I love you so much, little brother.
My name is PJ May, and I'm sharing some memories of my mom, Shirley Jocelyn. My mom would be surprised and humbled to know that she's being remembered in such a public way. My mom had a sense of adventure and fun, arranging for camping and canoeing trips in the Adirondacks, coordinating winter skiing and sledding trips for our family and church friends, and planning fabulous dinner parties in our home. One time, she challenged my two brothers and me to a month of eating a different vegetable every day, going from A to Z. She was very creative and a good problem solver. In later years, she would end our visits by telling me how much she loved me and appreciated what I did for her. I felt so fortunate that we had this special time together so I could return in some small way the love and devotion she had for our family. I'll close by sharing what she always said as I waved goodbye. Now be good, but just a little bit bad. Thanks, Mom. Miss you.
You could try. Played in 7th grade than I would be where I'm at today.
I was probably a little naive. I think I had a lot of confidence at that time, so I don't think it really sets in until now, probably what that really was.
The two seniors have been full-time starters since 8th grade, but continue to put in the work.
He's always somebody that you can find in the gym and always trying to get extra reps in, you know, either before practice, after.
She won a match up to that competition to be able to compete with the best. So a lot, the dedication to learning and the passion that she has for the game. So that's what amazes me.
To know how precious that opportunity is. Zach Borg, Dakota News Now Sports.
USD women's volleyball team was also in action tonight, looking to sweep NDSU.
Of the United States government and without authorization. This is disturbing to me that they would continue to do this. I'm not saying that should necessarily be criminally prosecuted, but remember, this is something that people in the Obama administration actively investigated people for doing. And I think that's really disheartening. And in a word, really uncool for them to do this during the Trump administration, actively undercutting the then current administration in charge of the United States government.
Senator Mike Lee, thanks for dropping in. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Tonight, the former Trump official is calling out what he says are the new administration's attempts to spread misinformation about exactly what the Trump team got done with respect to COVID and what they left behind. He's live next.
We made you.
I took out this personal loan with SoFi, and it significantly helped.
And as well to take her to a hospital and for her to be safe from COVID-19 as well. So I am wholly against this motion to instruct because it is in opposition to my motion to instruct that said, do not take this money out because of all the cities and counties and jurisdictions and school districts that are in desperate need along with states. This is not red or blue. This is about the American people. And this is not about someone that doesn't care. President Biden and Dr. Jill care about the American people. Thank goodness we have someone who cares as opposed to what we had before. I yield back to the gentleman from Nevada. I oppose this motion to instruct.
Member from Nevada's time is
alienation from the political system and a resulting breakdown in social norms. For some groups, and individuals this breakdown leads to violence they see as justified to achieve political ends. End quote.
Dealers.
Arby's has an enormous
For skin.
Coach of the Wolves begins tomorrow night against the Bucks in Milwaukee. That's a look at sports. Phil's back in a moment with the final check on your forecast.
winning motor.
Is made possible by the Anderson Family Fund, Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, the Cheryl and Philip Milstein family, Candace King Weir, the Strauss Family Foundation, Bernard and Denise
Sheraton, so you can get going first thing. It lasts up to 6 times longer than Benadryl.
and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Christiana Manpour in London. The race against climate change starts up again in earnest now. Here in Britain, Prince Charles today warned there is no time to waste. And with the United States now back in the Paris Climate Agreement this weekend, America's so-called climate czar, the former Secretary of State John Kerry, pledged that his country would lead a global response and warned that there is only 9 years to get our environmental act together. As he says, millions of people just have to look out their windows to see the effects of this emergency. Pakistan is one of the most climate vulnerable nations in the world. Monsoon rains are getting more extreme every year. And Kiribati, one of the world's poorest countries, a small island nation in the Central Pacific, faces complete obliteration as rising sea levels threaten to submerge it. The former president of this fragile paradise, Anote Tong, joins me now, and from Pakistan, the activist and UN Youth Ambassador, Aliza.
To people. Healing during this difficult time can also come from music. We asked Bishop Marvin Sapp, a renowned gospel singer, to record his platinum-selling hit, Never Would Have Made It. Listen with us and pay special attention to the photos you'll see from America.
Who happens to be a member of the board of the Obama Foundation, and Tim Miller's back with us, contributor to The Bulwark and the former communications director for Jeb Bush. Tim, just like the congressman, you've done nothing to deserve this, but here's where we're going to start. Join me in listening to Lindsey Graham tonight on Fox News.
He will position himself as the alternative to Joe Biden. He, I think, will make a speech that will unify Republicans on policy. That I think he's been working the phones. I was with him all weekend. He wants us to win in 2022. And stay tuned. I think you're going to see over the next couple of months Donald Trump lead the Republican Party on policy and give us the energy we need to take back the House and the Senate.
So, Tim, it naturally follows he was such a policy guy for 4 years in the White House that he would just kind of morph into this role. Your reaction?
Yeah, wasn't Lindsey Graham done with President Trump on the night of January 6th? Yeah. That lasted about 12 minutes, right? I guess it was just one trip to the airport, getting yelled at by people in red hats, and all of a sudden Lindsey was back on board. Here's the problem, I was encouraged by what Governor Hutchinson of Arkansas had to say. The issue with that is that Donald Trump's former press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, has declared the Arkansas State House hers and cleared the Republican field of the lieutenant governor and soon to be the attorney general of the state of Arkansas, because all that matters to Republican voters is fealty to Donald Trump. And so when you hear what Lindsey has to say, when you hear Asa Hutchinson, when you hear what all these Republicans have to say, what is undergirding all of this is that everybody realizes Republican voters want Trump, and that's why in open races over the next 2 years all across the country, you're not going to be hearing any Republican voters Republican politicians that sound like me. You're not going to be hearing any that sound like how Mitch McConnell sounded the day after the impeachment with his finger-wagging speech. They're not going to sound like Mitt Romney. They're all going to sound like some version of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, like some version of Lindsey Graham tonight over on Hannity, because that's what their voters want, and they're stuck and they're scared and they miss their opportunity to get rid of it.
So, David, for lack of a better term, the Burn It All Down caucus is going to be with us for a while. Axios further reports that payback is the president's chief obsession, his chief motivator. it just makes for a lousy bumper sticker, does it not?
Well, this is the problem, I think, for the Republican Party, Brian, is if you look historically in national elections, presidential elections, in core battleground states, whether they be Senate or governor, generally the party that wins those races is the party whose base is more closely connected to the middle of the electorate. And the Democratic Party from 1968 to 1992, as you know, only won the White House once, in 76, and that's probably only because Ford pardoned Nixon. So the Republican Party right now, and by the way, they're putting all their chips on Donald Trump, who failed to get over 47% of the vote twice. But Tim is exactly right. The people who voted in primaries, who give most of the money, who are most active on social media, they would pledge lifetime loyalty to Donald Trump and his family. And so if you look at the 22 Senate map, you've got key Senate races in Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. These are places where I think Trump continuing to be the face of the Republican Party will hurt his party in those competitive Senate races, much less looking down the road to 24. Now, I think Trump's motivation here is obviously he's probably the greatest narcissist ever to be on planet Earth. But, you know, I'm sure he thinks to the extent he looks like he could run for office and be the nominee, that may help him in his legal issues. I doubt that's the case. And that's the one thing. Is Donald Trump going to look as attractive to Republican primary voters 2 years from now, 3 years from now, than he does now? Maybe he will, but I would definitely take the short on that.
And
found out that Hal had passed away from COVID. It's still a thing I think we're all kind of grappling with, but he's had a massive influence on my life, whether he knew it or not, and I'm all the better for it.
On April 28th, 2020, I lost my mother, Farida Kedwani, to COVID-19. I'm her daughter, Kurat, and not a day goes by without me thinking about my mother and remembering her. She lived in India for half her life, and she was a teacher there. She immigrated to the U.S. with my father, my brothers, and proceeded to be a teacher with the New York City Board of Ed until she retired. She was really the life of the party. She cared so much for so many people. I remember that she would always try to make me feel better. If I felt I gained weight, she would tell me, no, it's just the weather. It's so strange not to have her here. I wish that COVID hadn't taken her from us.
I'm Pastor Yolanda Flowers.
And I'm Randy Flowers.
And we are two of the 4 children of the late Bishop James M. Flowers Jr., who was one of the first to die in the state of Maryland from COVID-19 on April the 6th, 2020 at the age of 84. Our father was a great man, and we miss him dearly. He was the founder and pastor of the Shining Star Free Will Baptist Church in Sea Pleasant, Maryland for 38 years. He was also a community activist who gave his heart to the people, receiving keys to 2 cities, and also being honored with a street named after him in the city of Sea Pleasant, Maryland. Our father was married to our mother, the love of his life, the late Margaret Louise Flowers, for 58 years. She predeceased him just a year prior to his death. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my father. I wish he was here.
And also, he was a great recording artist from the age of 9 from Longwood, North Carolina. He sang for 70 years, and one of the songs that sticks with me forever is What Will I Leave Behind?
Introduce.
The nurse. But I do have to say I'm a little bit bothered.
100 million population in your country, and you can't lift the whole population to another country. But there are major issues, right? I mean, it's not a greenhouse producing nation, but there's the monsoons, the trees and the logging that's going on. What are the biggest issues when it comes to climate in Pakistan?
Well, more than 11,000 scientists in 153 different countries have declared a climate emergency. The UK, Canada, France, Ireland, New Zealand, they've all declared a climate emergency, but Pakistan's still far away from that. And I think as part of this emergency declaration, we should be contributing to the climate change mitigation and decarbonization efforts possible in our capacity and promoting what is a circular economy for sustainable development. I think such important measures will include utilizing renewable sources of energy and taking steps to reduce our emissions. Even though we are contributing to less than 1% of the global carbon emissions, like you mentioned, we should still keep in mind that national emissions will increase due to population, economic, industrial, and urban growth. So a major co-benefit of emission reduction will be improvement in our air quality. And I think another important aspect of the emergency declaration, or this issue rather, is that on climate change adaptation, without which we will observe major environmental disasters throughout the country. And in the very first year of this decade, as a climate change, Pakistan witnessed a wide range of weather abnormalities and related natural disasters, landslides, glacial lake outbursts resulting in flash floods up in northern areas, the change in precipitation patterns leading to urban and urban floods, and the longer-term droughts in Sindh, where I'm based. The recent wave of this unusual warmer winter season in the month of December is a present manifestation of climate change. And this is why I think climate change adaptation must be a priority for all sectors, and it should be incorporated as soon as possible in their policies and programs and action plans.
Elisa, when all those young people around the world following Greta Thunberg were marching all over the world, they were in Pakistan as well. And it looks like your government is talking about increasing solar power, but also electric vehicles, trying to bring that in. There are also obviously complaints about corruption, about perhaps it's the inability to actually get it organized in a way that protects it and that actually makes a difference on the ground. Can you talk to me? Plus, of course, is the plan to build, or rather to plant, I think it's 10 billion trees, because loggers and people just cut them down, which has its own negative climate impact. Where are those issues headed now? Do people have confidence in the government's electric car program or in the tree planting program?
I think there are mixed reactions here for the local population, and half the population believes that this is going to a long-term benefit, and the other half of the population still doesn't believe climate change is an issue that's going to affect them. I think that Pakistan's government needs to change and demonstrate through implementation and take a leadership position in climate change mitigation and adaptation. The private sector and civil society both should also join hands to have a fully inclusive and coordinated response. And in such a holistic way, we will be adapting to a whole society approach. In terms of the proposed adaptation actions, you mentioned electric vehicles, the 1 million tree plantation. I think they're good benefits in the long term, but they're not immediately going to get us any results, since we're a long way from that, a lot of political and technical issues. But I think in the short term, we've got different projects from technical assistance with objectives around multi-sector projects with opportunities for climate and water and disaster management, as well as effects in building climate resiliency for irrigation infrastructure.
Let me move to President Tom.
Ship station saves us so much time. It makes it.
Why Amira Tandon is immensely qualified for this job, and I think generally presidents, when they put forward qualified candidates, should get support from both parties, but certainly unanimous support from your own party. So on substantive ground, this makes no sense. My guess is some of these Democratic senators who are in tougher states may want to, cherry pick a vote here or two to suggest that, they still retain their independence. At the end of the day, this is not, Joe Biden used to say often when I worked in the White House with him, no sense dying on a small cross. This one makes no sense to me. But I think the big parts of Joe Biden's agenda are going to get through, even with that narrow majority, and I think that's important to focus on. But I still think it's worth fighting for Neera Tanden, because I think she
has written 6 books, including his latest bestseller, Finding Meaning, The 6th Stage of Grief. Thank you, David, for joining us. You're currently working with people who have lost loved ones to COVID-19. What do you say to them?
I let them speak. Thank you for having me, Jake. The first thing I do is I let them speak. I witness their stories. I hear about their loved ones. Grief is such an isolating experience. in our old world. It's excruciating these days for so many.
And it's not just obviously the loss of life, because there's also been this horrific economic catastrophe. What do you even begin to say to someone who's lost their home or their job, their social connections, in addition to loved ones? They're suffering as well in a compounded way.
Such a good point. We often think of grief as only around death and forget it's always the death of something. It's the death of a job. It's a death of your income. It's a death of your home. So it is a true grief that people are feeling, and it's not being seen. I think, of 3 types of losses we're dealing with now. Obviously, the horrific loss of the 500,000 lives. We're also dealing with the grief of the world that has gone, the jobs, the restaurants, the place we used to gather, the world we all knew just a year ago. And the third is the collateral losses, the mental illness that's unseen, the death by suicides that are increasing, cancer treatments that are being delayed and postponed. There's so many loss these days, as we don't even know that the discomfort we're feeling on a daily basis is grief.
Yeah, not to mention all the children traumatized by the lack of social connection because they're doing education remotely. How do we...
Friends, connections, just the socialization that kids deserve.
Yeah. How do we as Americans process a number like 500,000? How can you even wrap your head around it?
We can't. Our mind tends to go numb, and I really encourage people to work through that tendency. One of the most horrific things in this situation that's never happened before is when someone dies of cancer and we discuss our loved one who dies of cancer. We've never had anyone say, yeah, I don't know if I believe in the whole cancer thing. People have lost so many lives and souls, and then they receive, instead of support and condolence, doubt, dismissal, denial. And this grief is going so unseen. So when someone tells us their loved one has died from COVID or anything else during this time, it's not a moment to respond. It's a moment to listen, to understand, to be curious about that person, to hear and witness their grief.
Would you lead us in a moment of reflection for those whom we've lost and for those struggling to get by and to get through this pandemic?
Absolutely. I wanted to write some words for this unique occasion that's so horrific that we're dealing with. A loved one dying is the hardest experience any of us will have to face. The pain is excruciating. The feeling of devastation unmatched by anything we have ever known. Many of you have experienced a forced separation from your loved ones when they died. I want to remind you, they still died with all of your love. I don't believe when our loved ones die, we stop loving them, and I don't believe they stop loving us. Let us not give death any more power than it has. It has the power to end a physical life, but not our relationships and not our love. Love never dies. Let me take a moment and speak directly with you to those 500,000 souls. Let us take a moment and send them love. And as we go forward in life, to let them know we will never move on from you, but rather forward with you. We will bring you with us in our life and in our future. You remain unforgettable, and we will always honor you. Others may find it hard to comprehend the losses, but we will create a world where your death is not meaningless because your life was so meaningful. We may now feel this is a traumatic wound in our life and in our world, and we hope someday for this to become our cherished wound. We will remember you today and always. You will live forever in our love. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time and for those words. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Every victim of COVID leaves behind something that we will never forget, such as a man whose music might live on forever, the husband and wife who were inseparable, and the brother who lived life the way he wanted.
My name is Deborah McCoskey Reisert, and I am the sister of Bobby McCoskey of Clarksville, Indiana. Bobby was taken by COVID on April 29, 2020. He was born with an intellectual disability. He didn't let that stop him from living life the way he wanted, though. He loved to volunteer. He spent decades ringing the bell for the Salvation Army. He loved arts and crafts. One time he called to tell me that he went to the Indiana Special Olympics and he earned the silver medal in the sport of bowling. Our family remembers him for his kind heart. He gave to anyone that he saw in need, even though he had very little means. Our family's hearts are shattered. Bobby loved the song. The end of the lyrics say, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." I don't know what that looks like yet, but for now our family started Bobby's Bikes so we can continue his legacy of kindness and generosity.
When I was a kid, and I was a kid, I thought of Tommy as the protector. If we lived in the 12th century, he could have been, I don't know, Richard the Lionhearted. He had a good heart. He was a fierce friend. And he's the kind of guy you want on your side in a bar fight. I will miss him and the insanity we all went through together.
It's either the assurance of 100%.
I think, I think it goes beyond whether there's success or achieved or not. I think really the story is about a family assimilating to themselves, to each other. I think, for my particular character, Jacob, he's kind of on a singular mission, and he puts the weight of his family and their existence on his back, and in some ways he kind of makes it his own and only his. And I think it's through the difficulty and through certain situations that he comes to realize that this experience is shared, that the family is going through this all together, and that it's not just on him. And so, Jacob, his journey is really understanding that his family is so much more than their functions, that he is so much more than their functions, that they are just all in it together.
I thought the character of David, your son, and the grandmother who comes to live with you, the mother of your wife who comes to live with you, is really poignant. David has a bit of a heart condition, we understand, and the grandma is actually, trying to bolster his confidence as well as anything else. Let's just play this little clip.
교회 버스 왔어요. 데이빗 놔두고 너 먼저 가. This just gets better and better.
어느 사람이 그랬어? 아니 저렇게 무거운 걸 어떻게 들었어? 그렇게 무거운 걸 혼자 들었어? 아이고.
There's so many of these stories where the grandparents are such a glue to the family. What?
Senator Manchin's public statement makes this a challenge. We need to find support on the Republican side of the aisle.
It always comes down to the math. The Senate split 50-50. With Manchin defecting, Democrats need help from the other side. There are questions about Tandon's qualifications, but the administration isn't budging.
The president nominated her because he believes she'd be a stellar OMB director. She's tested. She's a leading policy expert. She's rolled up her sleeves and done the work.
But with Collins and O coupled with GOP Senator Mitt Romney, the nomination could lack the votes for confirmation. Those nays mean the nomination could face the confirmation equivalent of deletion.
Please start with $1. I invest in Robinhood like I invest in my game.
Apollo 11 in quarantine, March 6th.
This, allergy sufferers, is my favorite Zysol bedtime story. It's about the time when allergy symptoms ruined people's sleep and made them miserable all the next day. Oh, what relief they found taking Zysol at night. It worked while they slept and they woke refreshed for more productive days ahead. Zysol provides powerful relief. Plus, it lasts up to 6 times longer than Benadryl, works faster than Claritin, and on first dose provides the same relief as Zyrtec in a pill nearly half the size. So, be wise all, take Zysol. At night.
Let me show you something. Something different.
I like the sound of that.
It's time.
Start the show.
Yes!
Complex series of ramps and love you. Your serenity and ease are
their tails, they were doing backflips.
I'm living my best life. America.
It's difficult to process, and it may be difficult to grieve when we still do not know when this cruel pandemic will end. We do, however, hope that this hour of prayer and reflection, memories and music may help some of you begin to heal. We're going to leave you today with Brigham Young University's a cappella group Vocal Point singing the song, Be Thou My Vision. May the memories of all of the Americans lost to this cruel virus be a blessing.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art, thou my best art, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence, my still be my vision over of all.
So this is not the